just incredible flooding and also incredible fire. There's been tons of different levels of analysis. There's now more than like 150 peer-reviewed scientific papers that really deal with the nuance and the detail of what is all of the evidence for this period of time. It has a lot to do with analysis of things like ice core samples, where we can drill down into the ice in places like Antarctica and Greenland and in Russia and places, because every year as the snow falls, it gets compressed into ice, and it contains data about things like oxygen isotopes. We can look at temperatures and particulate matter, and we're getting very good at like drilling down, taking these cores out that go back in some cases hundreds of thousands of years.
I'd like to welcome to the show Ben Kirkwick. How you doing, Ben?
Good. Thanks. Yeah, Alex, it's great to be here, man. Thanks for the invite.
Thank you so much for coming on the show, man. I'm so excited to talk to you about one of my favorite conversations, ancient civilizations and lost history and all the stuff that the mainstream archaeology community a lot of times says that's a bug of hogwash. But I always like, to really dig into these questions. It's all about asking these questions that, well, really, was it made, the pyramids made with slaves? But like that doesn't make a lot of sense. And did we really start 6,000 years ago? Well, there's this thing called Göbekli Tepe that just showed up in the 1940s, for God's sake. So all these kind of things are changing our origins, not only about our human origins, but also our spiritual origins, where we're coming from, all that kind of stuff. So you are up there in my eyes with Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson, and
thank you.
Those kind of guys who are fighting the good fight, taking the arrows in the back, as they say, as you're coming over the hills. So I appreciate the work you're doing, brother.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. It's high praise indeed. I look up to those guys greatly as well. They're, part of the reason I got into this in the first place. But I think you described it well in terms of a lot of this is really about asking questions. I think the other element to this whole field, or this journey of trying to discover and understand, is there, what is our past, what we've always said it was. I think a big part of that is really embracing and being open-minded to a lot of the new evidence that, particularly in the last 20 years, is really shaping and I think having an effect and changing the reality of our history, and particularly the very earliest parts of our history. Like we kind of have a pretty good grip on, the last 4,000 or 5,000 years in terms of what's happened. The problem is kind of what happened before that. Where did those ancient civilizations start? Where did they get their roots? And what has happened potentially in hundreds of thousands of years before that? Because there's been just a tremendous amount of new evidence that comes from adjacent scientific fields as well as within archaeology. You mentioned Göbekli Tepe, that's a big one, that I think should be having a massive impact on the story of our past. And as is the case with lots of different established scientific fields, change is slow to come, right? The very nature of establishment is to resist change and to maintain the status quo. But I do think now, at this point, there's an accumulation of evidence coming from these fields. We know an awful lot more. Cataclysm, the human timeline, the genetic complexity of the human race. We keep getting older and older. We keep finding older and older stuff. The further back we go, it seems like the more sophisticated the stuff is that we're finding in a lot of cases. This is true for what you see in South America. It's true for what you see in Egypt. Things like that. And I do think we're at the point where it's time to reevaluate those very earliest parts of the history of our civilization and of our race on this planet.
Now, I've been talking to so many people on the show about this great shift in human consciousness, that we're all becoming more awakened to what is just to what we truly are. And the information that's coming out and the questions that people are asking are becoming more and more broad and more open, where they wouldn't have 10, 15, 20 years ago. Why do you believe now that a lot of these questions, and it really, Graham really is one of the forefathers of this,
Sure.
of these asking these deep questions. But when Fingerprints of the Gods came out, which was the 90s?
95, yeah.
Yeah, around 95 is when that came out. it started kind of, more people started to ask these questions. Why do you think, in general, people are becoming more and more curious about our origins? And secondly, why are we starting to find stuff that just has no explanation? Like the evidence that we're starting to find is just like, you could argue the pyramids, even on a losing argument about, but there's certain things that you're just like, I'm sorry, man. The caves in China, the underground cities in Turkey that they're finding, go to Göbekli Tepe, all of these things are being found and really analyzed at such a deep level. Why do you think it's happening at this point?
Well, there's a couple of questions in there. I mean, one of the reasons I think that I do, and I feel the same way. I feel like there's a groundswell of movement. There are more and more people interested in these topics. One of the reasons I think is that this type of information is much more readily available to everybody now. As you've had the rise of the internet, and particularly like video and new media platforms, YouTube, things like this, are helping to spread a lot of these topics, because prior to the type of content that we're seeing today on those platforms and its popularity, I mean, a lot of this information was out there, all these concepts and ideas about, like, there is a lot of contradictions, there is a lot of new evidence, there is a lot of problems with the established narrative around our history. That type of data was contained in these books, you know, and you have to be really into the field. You've got to read these big books. And it's guys like, you know, Graham and his predecessors as well that have been talking about these topics. And if you go back further than that, it's kind of like the discussion and any of this data and the nuance that's involved in this discussion was really very much limited to the academic halls, you know, like it was the academics, the Egyptologists, it was them and their peers that were discussing this. There might have been some societies and organizations that were into, like, explorers clubs, but these are very select and kind of elite organizations. It's not really a public awareness thing. So we've seen this transition into this new media field. We've seen the rise of some of these alternative ideas and the logic, and I think the arguments and the cases that they're making from guys like Graham, you know, Robert Bauval, there's so many, John Anthony, most of these people that have written these books, and, you know, and then that's translated then into new media, and we have the internet, and these ideas are spreading, and I think they do make a lot of sense. There is a lot of challenging evidence, and as we've gone forward, particularly in the last 20 years, we've made these new discoveries. We've started to apply our modern technology to some of these discoveries, often in, you know, this is efforts of people that are well and truly outside of these fields. They're outsiders, they're engineers, they're just interested people that typically aren't in these academic fields, that are trying to apply, you know, modern techniques to uncover the truth about some of these new finds. And it's very, very challenging for that story. I mean, if you just look at Cataclysm alone, I think this is a huge, huge piece of the puzzle. And this is not something, this is very much in the last 20 years we've discovered that the Earth has been through this tremendously catastrophic and cataclysmic period, and fairly recently too, very recently, from a geologic or, you know, any other time scale outside of, you know, the way that we measure time with our short lives. But in the last 13,000 years, you know, the Earth has been through this cataclysm that was probably one of the worst things that's happened to it in the last couple million years, and it was a period of time called the Younger Dryas. It marked the boundary between the Pleistocene and the Holocene, which is the era we're in today. It was, you can think of it as the end of the Ice Age, and it was only 13,000 years ago, but there's a massive megafaunal extinction event. It would have been a civilization-ending event. During this period of time, sea levels rose, you know, 400 feet almost in a very short period of time. It was just a catastrophic event that was most likely caused by a series of cosmic impacts and airbursts, particularly over the northern hemisphere, and it would have ended civilization. So, you know, when you look at it, when you look at events like that are now being revealed through modern science and new science, not in archaeology but in other disciplines, paleoclimatology, etc., ice cores, all these different sciences are contributing to this knowledge. It should have this tremendous impact on history, because, you know, not only was there a megafauna extinction event where megafauna, it would have ended any civilization that was around during that time. It actually corresponds with almost every single ancient origin story, even our own modern day religions and our origin stories, and these tales that are passed down through generations and generations, and often are just rehashes and reimaginings of older tales that came from older civilizations, like the flood story. The Noah flood story is often, people know this comes from the Sumerians and the Epic of Gilgamesh, a flood story. But you can't look at any ancient culture or religion and their origin stories and not find it just to be not. You'll always find like a great flood story or a great fire story, and this idea that mankind was ended through some giant cataclysm. And there was there were people that lived before that, but we went through this cataclysm and then we were sort of forced to start again. And I think there's a grain of truth in that now that's being revealed by a lot of this modern science. And for whatever reason, at this point, it's not really been acknowledged to any great degree by modern archaeology and the keepers of the tomes of the history books at the universities. But I think it's only a matter of time.
But also the other thing is that when people think of like, oh, the comet hit us and it's a civilization ender, it wasn't the Younger Dryas, again, to my rudimentary understanding of it, it was a huge event that took out a lot of humanity, but not all of humanity.
No, we survived it.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, it's not like the dinosaurs. Like the dinosaurs were,
right.
That's a planet killer. Whatever happened to them at that point, that was what I forgot how many millions of years ago.
65 million years ago.
Yeah, 65 million. That was a whole other conversation where it really just took over the planet and almost everything died. Almost.
Yes, yeah. So you have varying degrees of extinction level events. Either the KT boundary is the one that is often associated with the dinosaurs, and it is 6. That people think of that when they think of extinction level events, and no doubt that was a much bigger event than the Younger Dryas. And you have even bigger ones that go back in the past where you're talking about like 99% of all life basically being exterminated on the planet. That's crazy. I mean, you end up with just a few microbes and bacteria, and then everything has to start again from that perspective. That's happened.
And New York roaches.
Yeah, and roaches, of course. Yeah, yep. Yes.
New York roaches specifically.
Specifically, those things probably were fine. They might have thrived in that environment. But yeah, I mean, the Younger Dryas, look, it was, as I said, probably the worst thing to happen to the planet in the last sort of 2 to 5 million years. It was a big event. And if you look at what happened, I mean, it wiped out essentially half of the megafauna that was here at the time. So people, I think a lot of people aren't aware of these extinction events, but people are generally aware of things like, mammoths and saber-toothed tigers and, the American...
The giant bear. Yeah, the giant bear.
The short-faced bear. There was the American cave bear, the American lion. There were armadillos the size of Volkswagens. There was the giant ground sloth that was almost the size of an elephant. These are all animals that existed in North America from basically from 2.5 million years ago up until about 13,000, 12,000 years ago, and they all went away. And if you look at the total of extinction of species that went extinct in this short period of time, it's a roughly half of the megafauna. Megafauna being anything that's, I think, over about 40 kilograms of body weight, including us, I guess. Certainly me.
Yo. That fat Greg, what's up, bro? How are you doing, man?
Described as megafauna, so half of those species that were around when
you feeling sore from that P90X?
Right down to and including a couple of species of birds. And of course, the mainstream explanation for this is kind of this nonsensical thing that has to do with overhunting, with by humans, and it really is nonsense. If you look at South America, for example, they lost something like 85% of their megafauna. North America is a similar number. Like, it's huge numbers of species went extinct in this real short period of time. So it was a catastrophic event. It was in various places. You had just incredible flooding, and also incredible fire. There's been tons of different levels of analysis. There's now more than like 150 peer-reviewed scientific papers that really deal with the nuance and the detail of what is all of the evidence for this period of time. It has a lot to do with analysis of things like ice core samples, where we can drill down into the ice in places like Antarctica and Greenland and in Russia and places, because every year as the snow falls, it gets compressed into ice, and it contains data about things like oxygen isotopes. We can look at temperatures and
no way.
We're getting very good at like drilling down.
Probably do cramps
to go back in some cases hundreds of thousands of years. And we can look at almost like a year-by-year layer of what were the conditions.
Core, nice. Awesome, buddy.
Exactly, yeah. In fact,
Boxing
tree rings
style,
are another,
yeah.
we don't really have tree rings that go back 13,000 years, but tree rings have told us some interesting things about the
Yo,
climate
Stash, what's up,
in
man?
history, in
Thanks
history
for being
as
here,
well.
my friends.
CO2
We got to get this
that,
time. I
but
know you probably are
if
sick of
you-
this level, but
if you go back down, so one of the interesting things that happened, it's not just
we're
you
just
know,
getting
you don't
started
just get these
in it, to
massive
be
floods,
honest.
because what likely happened
What's up,
you
bros?
have, during this period of time, sea
Yo,
level
Stash,
rose
the
300
package
to 400
arrives
feet,
tomorrow,
like
my
100
man.
meters,
It's being delivered
meters
tomorrow.
in a short period of time, and it's associated with these massive pulses, these meltwater pulses.
Nice, yo,
Of course,
thanks, bro.
that's all of the ice that was on
Thank
top
you,
of
man.
particularly the northern hemisphere being melted quite rapidly and then finding its way into the ocean.
It's
And that's the trigger
I think
for
so.
it. So you
I don't
have
know.
these-
It might
these-
still be in the
these
U.S. It
impacts,
said it
these
was in
airbursts that are probably going
Syracuse,
into the ice.
Buffalo,
These ice caps, the
Syracuse.
Laurentide and Cordilleran glacier systems that were pretty much over most of North America, also the European glacier as well. And these things are melting rapidly, tremendous flooding. You also have, just these airbursts and impacts are like, they're much stronger events than even giant volcanoes going off. Like it would cause almost like a nuclear winter environment on the planet. And in fact, we see this with temperature analysis. There's
Yo,
like a
what's up,
800-900
Mooney?
Period from
Can't take the accent
12,800 years
seriously.
to about 11,600 years ago, where the temperature just drops
Oh, wow,
dramatically
insane.
and quickly to like this, the depth of the coldest
Some
parts of the
Dorval,
ice age.
crazy.
And it stays there for about this 800-year period, and then it just gets jolted back out again. So the modern thinking is that there were two events. There was an event that precipitated this at the start at 11,800 or 900 years ago, and then something at around 11,600 years ago.
Stream
which
drops,
is particularly
just refresh
interesting because
again.
that's the date that coincides
I'm
exactly
stream for
with Plato's
a
account
bit.
of the sinking of Atlantis. Like that's
Haha.
a really interesting correlation with that date.
Right.
But it's not, look, it's not just flooding. I mean, part of that ice core analysis also shows that at one point around 9% of the world's biomass was on fire, which is just an astronomical number.
LA?
CO2
What?
as well coming out.
Well,
in
it's
LA?
just pouring
You
it. Yeah, I mean,
serious? We're talking about LA, bro.
That's a huge fire. I mean, look, this.
Are you
these
serious right now?
This is what you would
Was it
call
in-
real
in
climate
LA?
change. Like this stuff
Are
that
you in
happened
LA?
30, 40,000 years ago. This is real climate change. This is
Rapid.
catastrophic and rapid climate change. It's not a runaway event. Like the Earth is very resilient to these shifts, but it's pretty rough on the life. Like
You're in
what
LA
happens,
right
so
now?
Either you don't get like life doesn't go extinct immediately because it's like under the blast like that. There's evidence for that too. It's really interesting actually.
Oh, you
There's
bought it
different
there, I
places
understand.
where mammoths and saber-toothed tigers and
understand.
trees and everything just like mashed up
I
together,
understand.
where you've got like mammoth hip bones up near their head. I mean, it's just you can tell these things were hit by a shockwave. But what happens ultimately is that you have this dramatic and rapid climate change that affects the environment the megafauna lives in, and of course that's what causes that extinction. It's this rapid change to their environment and their food sources. That all goes away and they go extinct in short order. And we see we've seen the result of that. Like Siberia, for example, was during this what you call in the Pleistocene was much warmer than it is now. Like Siberia is this tundra, cold wasteland, like this almost this.
It's a hard knock life, man.
This frozen landscape, but we have examples of megafauna and the mammoths and mastodons that live there that show that their diets were, it was huge plants.
Speaking
and
of sore, Moonraker must be
a
sore too.
green place. Like the climate was very different during the
I
Pleistocene.
don't know what I'm even doing.
Generally colder overall, but the climate zones on the planet were very
I did it
different, and
wrong.
they shifted rapidly as a result of the Younger Dryas.
And aren't they finding
Yeah,
now,
I understand. I get it.
bones and animals who like were frozen and now they're being defrosted because of the climate change that's happening currently, and they're finding them like with food in their mouth and like food in their stomach. So it was like a quick scenario.
That's
They
awesome, man.
froze like almost flash freezing in many
In some
cases.
places. Sure,
Yeah.
yeah, in some places. It's really interesting. Like there's the guys up in Alaska. There was a really interesting, I forget his name, John someone or other, went on Rogan's show. In fact, I've kind of had some halfway contact with him. He knows Randall Carlson. I know Randall Carlson. There's been some talk about getting up to this Alaskan boneyard. I mean, these guys, they're literally finding just everywhere these mammoth remains and skeletons and flat
Guys, we
frozen.
had
You
three
literally have
big
meat that
room
people guys actually
tragedies
eaten
last
some
stream.
Mammoth meat like this. It's
The
like been
third
frozen
one
for 12 or 13,000 years.
happened
and they
late
picked it up and
last
ate it at
night.
one point. I'm like, holy crap! that's a brave move. But
I was gonna say
And-
that's not the smartest situation to do.
no, that's what
I
you
got
do,
back
guess.
boosted
In
at the
Alaska, right?
upload.
In Alaska.
Same thing as that
But yeah,
clip.
there are
Clip
examples where
two,
you
quote
have
221.
like flesh. You have these animals that are almost intact, like baby mammoths with food in their stomach. I mean, and food in their mouth even. So they were killed very quickly and then frozen very quickly as well. So I imagine there are some scenarios and.
It was
the results
139
of this
pace for
just
sure.
catastrophic events
100%.
where you have this kind of massive polar vortex that can happen. I'm not
It was a
that familiar with that. It's
13
obviously it's
death
not
right at
everywhere,
the
but
console
certainly
or
in some
something?
places.
Oh no, I
as
didn't
a
pass away
result of
there.
this just,
So I didn't know the time,
we
so I
have
couldn't
nothing
guarantee
in
it.
our even the movies that try to simulate this stuff don't really do it justice. I mean,
I did
you
have like a
can
113 death at
get
the
a sense for that when you
console.
look at things like the floods and what happened. If you ever go out to eastern Washington State, there's an area of eastern Washington State called the Channeled Scablands, and it's probably one of the most spectacular environments you'll ever see because it is literally where the ground and the earth was just tore up because that was the path that these floodwaters took, and you're talking about volumes of water like 9 cubic miles of water per minute flowing through some of these environments. That's
Dynamics.
like, put it this way, it's about 100 times the volume of all the rivers on Earth flowing right now. Like all of the flowing water on Earth right now, you're talking about 100 times the volume of that was at the peak discharge rates of some of these floods. And so in a couple of weeks, essentially some of these events have carved these coulees that are miles and miles wide and
Yeah, honestly.
1,000 foot deep, and they just rip up this basalt and they just form these huge
Honestly,
scars
bro.
that are on the landscape. And today we drive through them. They've got these little lakes and stuff. It's all the recreation area, golf courses. Super spectacular environment, but when you look at it through the context of how did this form and when did it form and how quickly did this happen, you just stand back. This is something else. Like this is, I mean, it was catastrophic, and we've never experienced anything like it. Certainly not in our modern memory.
So with the sites that are being discovered now, in your opinion, were there any archaeological sites that we currently have excavated that were around prior to the Younger Dryas?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think the stuff in Turkey right now, Göbekli Tepe is probably the best example.
Right.
In fact, some of that goes back to during the Younger Dryas. Like literally, the carbon dating puts those sites in place during the period of the Younger Dryas.
Wow.
And in fact, Karahan Tepe and some of the other sites they're discovering in Turkey are actually older than Göbekli Tepe. What's interesting about Göbekli Tepe too is, and in fact, I can
Come on, it might be
give a plug
pace.
to like the Brothers of the Serpent podcast.
Same
friends of mine, they
situation,
put
dude.
out
6.5
videos
bars.
on
The other
YouTube
one
about
was
Göbekli
faster
Tepe
though, man.
That gets into the details.
I'm
of
gonna
how
pass
they've done
away.
the
I
dating
know
there,
I'm gonna
because
get lit up
people kinda
again,
know
man.
that Göbekli Tepe is carbon dated and.
I know I'm gonna get
established
lit
around
up
that
again though,
11,000
man.
You know, 11,000 years ago.
Like, come
9,000
on.
to 10,000 BC.
I don't know if it's
What's
pace
interesting about
either.
the dating there is that
It might
dating
not be
comes
pace,
from
dude.
material that are in these rough walls.
Should I just
that are
run
around
through the
those
drones
classic
because I have so much
cupola
health? Like,
shapes, these big megaliths.
I have too much
if you
health.
look at the site, what seems to have
You know what I
happened there
mean?
is that those
Like,
walls were
honestly.
built
That's
to
what I was thinking
repair
at the
that
time, like,
site.
because
Those
I
walls
lost
were
2
made
runs, like,
because
of
they
this much
encompass some of
health.
these teepelas, they
So I got lit
cover
up.
features
And I'm
of
thinking
the
maybe I just have
teepelas.
too much health.
It's almost like they were restoring and
I might just run
protecting
right through it.
something that was there beforehand, and all of the dating material and the dates come from this very rough and primitive, cobblestone.
It's gonna be
wall
a
that was
game
built
time
around
decision what
these
happens.
enclosures. And
I'm gonna see what
It's
happens.
an entirely different style to the T pillars and the megalithic work.
You know what'd be
I think
interesting
that's
if I
a good
get,
indicator that this was
like-
probably a later period,
Anyways,
a later
if I get a
period
boost to the body
of
armor,
occupation and building that happened there, which tells you
and
that
then I
these
run
T-pillars and
through the
these
drones, but I only get
original
one back
enclosures and
boost because I already got
the more
that boost, and I have like some
sophisticated work and stuff that is
invincibility
like, you know,
bars. So I gotta pick up that body armor
the
like that. I don't know if
20-foot
that's
high
even probable.
megaliths and some of them weighing 20, 30 tons was done at some unknown time before that, and probably fell into disrepair and had fallen over. And then during the Younger Dryas, you had a primitive set of people, Neolithic people, or I guess at that point it was Paleolithic or even Mesolithic, that came there and restored those sites and worked on them and did something to them, and that's where the dating comes from. And in fact, this evidence is backed up by the fact that in some of these walls that are built around these T-pillars, you actually have broken pieces of T-pillars being used as blocks in the wall. So it's as if those T-pillars were already broken, they'd fallen over, degraded, and then because they couldn't put it back together, they took that lump of stone, they put it in the wall, and they built the wall. So it's like people think and it is an old site, but it seems like it could be far older than that. We really don't know. I think it's a similar case for places like Egypt. I do think that some of those places which we attribute to the dynastic Egyptian civilization, say places like Gyges, Saqqara, Abu Sir, Dashur, I think there's a very good chance that elements of that infrastructure existed during the Younger Dryas, if not before, and then it was later occupied and reused and integrated into the dynastic Egyptian culture as we know it.
Do you think that
Holy fuck, that was fast. That was really fucking fast.
That there was a kind of a pillaging of, like, let's say the Great Pyramids, of all three of them, of elements to build other things throughout history.
God damn it.
But to be honest, if you just come across that thing and you're primitive, like, there's only so much you can do. Like, you can't move those things, lift those things, work those things. So that's, I think, one of the reasons why they're still in the shape
It could be
that they're
faster.
in,
It could still be faster than that.
Massive.
It could still literally be
these
faster than
blocks
that.
are how
Man, that was
big each?
fast.
Well,
And there's 2 million of them?
Through the drones.
They're not. I mean, there's certainly bigger blocks of material. If you take the Great Pyramid, for example, it's something like 6 million tons.
That was stupid.
Of limestone in that,
That was so fucking dumb.
2.5 to 3 million blocks. So the average block size is around 2 to 3 tons. Something like that. Which is a lot.
4 big room
it's a lot,
tragedies
but
now.
You have much bigger stones. Obviously, you have like 70, 80 ton single piece granite stones and like dozens and dozens of them that make up the central granite structure inside the pyramid. And this, you've got to remember, this is also like 150 feet above ground level. Like, there's dozens of these massive granite ashlars and beams, 70, 80 tons a pop. I mean, you've got foundation tiles around. People often, I love taking people to Gyges because people go there and they look up at the pyramid, but one of the more interesting elements of it is actually looking down at what you're standing on, because it's not just bedrock.
Man,
there
dude.
was preparation work done into the bedrock, and there's actually foundation
come on,
tiles
man.
locked together and locked into the
come
bedrock
on.
in this 3D geometric puzzle almost that is just
come on,
perfectly
man.
fit together. And some of those stones,
That's fucking dumb as shit.
you're talking 200 plus tons. Single piece stones that were put in there and shaped and placed extremely precisely. In fact, I'm working on a video right now about probably what I think is the largest single piece stone that is at Giza that we found only recently. That's around 450 tons. It's kind of insane to think of somebody moving those things around. But yeah, the pyramids have been pillaged and used as quarries for stone for literally thousands of years. This is an activity that began, as far as we know, in the middle and new kingdom of the ancient Egyptian civilization itself. So you're talking about like 1500 BC. They were already taking stone from these monuments, and that has been an activity that has continued right up until about probably only 60, 70 years ago. Not even that long ago. I mean, it's been well reported by guys like Flinders Petrie, who visited these sites in the late 1800s, early 1900s, that there's just camel trains.
If I ran around the drones, would I have survived? Maybe.
Should tell you something, like this, because that's how massive and how giant they are, is that people have been taking stone and using these things as quarries for literally thousands of years. Yet and taking something away and destroying it's much easier than building it. But the claim is that you could build the Great Pyramid inside of 25 years with nothing more than Bronze Age technology, human horsepower, ropes,
the first one,
and sleds.
because I was going to run around it, right?
But
since I got the first one, I'm like, well,
it's one of the
since I already got the
problems
first
I have
one, I
with,
might as well just go through
I
it.
guess the orthodox story of particularly dynastic Egyptian history is that not only are they saying you build this thing in a short amount of time, which
you have no idea how
if
the
you
big
take
room's going to go
25
anyways.
years as an example, and the number of stones that are in the Great Pyramid, that equates to one stone being quarried, shipped, finished, taken to the site, put in place, and perfectly set every 5 minutes.
That sucks, man.
24 hours a day, 7 days a week for 25 years. That's what it would take to finish
perfectly.
That
that was so fucking heartbreaking, bro.
Like,
well, yeah, I mean, yes and no. There is mortar. I mean, the superstructure of the pyramid isn't as precise as, say, the foundation. It's certainly not as precise as the internal work. But that figure of 5 minutes doesn't account for the planning. It doesn't account for the foundation work. It doesn't account for all of the leveling and the tiles that go into it. It doesn't account for the sophistication of the interior spaces, the digging of the tunnels. Like, it's just It's real nonsense. It's complete nonsense. And not only that, you have to also remember that these are supposedly amongst the very first pyramids ever built. it's like it's like we started with the space shuttle and we went backwards to like the horse and cart, because you don't start with the perfect sort of massive sort of technologically sophisticated product and then go backwards, which is what seems to have happened in the orthodox timeline of pyramid building, because the Egyptians, we all know about the Giza and the Great Pyramid and the 2 or 3 other pyramids that are there, but as you go forward in time, like, the Middle Kingdom, they kept building pyramids, but they got much less sophisticated. They were made from mud brick, and they were much smaller, and there's still some of you can see today, but they're slowly eroding because mud brick erodes. But yet these giant stone monuments are eternal, and they're supposedly the first ones we made. And of course, there's endless precision when it comes. There's precision when you look at like how these things are aligned to true north, so it's one of the most accurately aligned and set out buildings that we've ever made. In fact, we didn't even match it, I think, until the late 1800s. We actually could build it something that was actually almost as accurate as the pyramid. It encodes all this data. It encodes basically a scale model of the northern hemisphere of the planet.
Come on, man.
To a ratio of, I think it's, I'm going to get this wrong, it's 43,200. So if you take the height of the pyramid and you multiply it by 43,200, you get the polar radius of the Earth, so from the center of the Earth to the North Pole. If you take the perimeter length of the Great Pyramid and you multiply it by 43,200, you get the equatorial circumference of the planet. It encodes the shape of the planet. The fact
where would we build
spheroid.
it though,
So
and with what
by
materials?
that I mean
If you
the
were actually seriously
Earth's not
doing
a
it,
sphere, right? It's like a little.
Canada,
it's a little
because
further east-west
Canada's a
than it
lot
is
of
north-south,
granite,
right,
but
'cause of the spinning.
the glaciers will come
Slightly
here in
eggy,
at least
slightly
10,000 years
Well, it's just
or
slightly
less.
flat on top, a little
It
fatter
would be
around it.
destroyed.
Yeah.
And that difference, like that translates into
You'd
a
probably have to go
ratio of
somewhere near
difference
the
between
equator.
latitude and longitude. So if you draw that grid line across the map and you go down and you look at like, okay, at the equator, I've got one grid square of whatever 1 degree or,
I mean,
or
insane.
1 minute of latitude.
They'll
and
never
longitude.
allow that
It's
though.
slightly
I mean, they
longer
might
east-west
if
than it
you
is
they'll for
north-south.
money.
It's not a
If you
square,
give
it's a
them money,
rectangle.
if you find a
That
big
ratio
someone with a big
between
interest
latitude
that
and
wants to do
longitude
it,
is also
with a
exactly
huge ego like
replicated,
Jeff
very
Bezos or
precisely
something.
replicated in the Great Pyramid.
the same quarries, that'd be
It
insane.
sits on something called a sockle, which is this
The Aswan
cubic
quarry. There's a lot.
wide and high
There's a lot of.
platform almost. So
If you look on Google
it's like
Earth,
this little
man, there's
ledge that it
like
sits on and
hundreds
sticks
of
out.
kilometers of
And it gives you
granite
2 ways of
outcrops in
measuring
Egypt.
The perimeter length,
to
right? You can
east
measure
of
the perimeter
Aswan,
length of the actual pyramid or the
like
perimeter
northeast of
length the
Aswan, east
sockle.
of
And if you compare
between
the ratio
the
of those
Nile
two lengths
and
between the sockle
the
and the
Red
pyramid,
Sea,
the perimeter
the
lengths, it's
Arabian
exactly
Sea.
the same ratio as latitude to longitude on the planet. It's bananas.
And so then
Go on
why?
Google,
So
there's
then
a lot of,
how-
like,
so when
black
mainstream
granite.
archaeology
I don't know if
is
it's like
confronted with these
granite,
facts.
obsidian. I don't know what it is.
What do they say? Oops.
Well, the answer is it's coincidence. I mean, that's generally the response you get is it's coincidence. And I think that, these things pile up and up and up. There's many more things you could talk about when it comes to precision and aspects of the Great Pyramid. And I think all
Man,
of
that
them,
run was so fast, dude.
I mean, it doesn't take very many of them
Dude.
to go, okay, that's not coincidence. There's obviously some more data going on here. I think it's one of the giant contradictions. It doesn't really get addressed, unfortunately. I think there's another explanation for this. I think I genuinely, and I respect the dynastic Egyptians. They did tremendous work. I mean, they were extremely capable civilization. They lasted for 3,000 years. It was an incredible, probably one of the greatest civilizations to have ever been on the planet. But they simply weren't capable and didn't have the knowledge set of achieving some of the things that we attribute to them. Like, for all of their capability, we know that particularly the Old Kingdom period, the earlier periods, I mean, they were very relatively primitive Bronze Age culture. No use of the wheel. No metals other than bronze, literally bronze and copper. No steel, no iron. So with no use of the wheel, there's no pulleys, there's no force multipliers, there's no advanced tools, there's no pottery wheel, there's no lathe, there's no nothing. But we have these incredible artifacts and architecture that comes from that period that show all of this sophistication and all of this encoded data.
That's true, bro.
And nobody's ever demonstrated that you can actually replicate that stuff with this primitive, with these very primitive methods of construction. nor do we have any evidence that the Egyptians actually had the data that it seems like are encoded in these artifacts.
I think it's a good idea.
You're left, I think, with two options, and this is, you could spend hours talking about this stuff, the weight of evidence that suggests this. But I think you're ultimately left with two options. One is
that's a great idea.
We have to drastically reevaluate what we think that the dynastic Egyptians were capable of. I think that's by far the least likely option. There's no evidence to suggest that they had advanced tools, that they had advanced knowledge. We know what they knew. Like, they wrote down what they did. They drew scenes on the walls showing how they did things, and we found their tools that are very primitive. The other option, I think, the one that the evidence supports best, and I think all of the adjacent evidence, cataclysm, genetics, timeline, is that the path of civilization is much longer. There's just more ups and downs, more cataclysm, and that's at some point in the past there was a much more advanced civilization that existed, that is probably responsible for this knowledge, that probably started these projects even if they didn't finish them, and that probably manufactured a lot of the things that the Egyptians then later inherited and integrated into their own culture over a period of thousands of years. And this originating civilization, this progenitor civilization, was probably one that spanned the globe, that was highly capable, because we see evidence
king of
for
Egypt
it in Turkey, in Lebanon, in South America, in Easter Island, potentially in China. All around the world you have these similar
I did not know that.
styles of megalithic building. You have a pyramid building culture. You have the works of people like George von Deschund and De Santilla, who wrote Hamlet's Mill, that show that there's astronomical knowledge encoded in all of these cultures all around the world that reflects a knowledge set that those cultures didn't have. But it does show you things like precession of the equinoxes, these sophisticated movements of the heavens.
King Charles, oh my gosh.
This idea that maybe there was a precursor culture that might have been responsible
for
idea. That initial set of knowledge that is then
hit him up on WhatsApp, on the gram,
time and distance, and ends up in all these other cultures. There's so much evidence for this, I think. And of course the Atlantis story with Plato, stuff like that. So I think that's the far more likely scenario. I think that's the one that the evidence best supports. And it's just, it's a battle to kind of get the mainstream academic community to kind of look at the past with a bit more of an open mind, because I think if we did that and we looked at these sites and we analyzed these artifacts and we used our own technology, we could probably learn something. We'd probably open up these doors. We'd learn a lot more about our origins and the history of civilization.
Do you think that when we say when
it'd be cool if you could make it functional, like have it being a water tower or a water reserve or something. The ego of
the current man,
you know what I mean, or even
doesn't allow that, because and this is the one thing I think you would agree with me on. At every moment in time, man has always thought that they had everything figured out. Every year that goes by, they're just like, nope, it's Zeus. That's the way it goes. Nope, it's the god Ra. All these kind of things. So I think that's probably one of the reasons why
in Las Vegas, the pyramid there, it was kind of hollow.
We're looking at the past through the lens of our technology today.
It was open.
But the ancient civilizations that you're talking about that might be more advanced, they could have been advanced in ways that we can't really comprehend, because it's a different kind of technology than we are currently using.
Yeah, 100%. In fact, I talk about this quite a bit. I think this is... It's a difficult concept to grasp if you haven't thought much about it before, but I think that's exactly right. I think all you have to do is look at the last 30, 40 years of our own technological progression, the rise of the internet, the rise of devices, and think, okay, so, we didn't, if you go back in time, you could only have to go back 30 or 40 years to
our lifetime, in our lifetime.
Yeah, in our lifetime, for people not to have a clue what a cell phone is, like a modern smartphone, touch screen, internet, all that stuff. These are new concepts. I like to illustrate it by saying, you don't have to go back to cave, but say you took this back to Neolithic times, so cavemen, let alone Victorian era or even 100 years ago, and you show this to like a phone to someone, they're gonna look at it and go, well, it's like a shiny piece of glass or something that breaks if you smash it. It's powered off, like it doesn't do anything. You have no context to understand what it is. But you and I couldn't build one, but we know what
how
it
is. Works. Yeah, we know how it works.
We know what it is, because we have context. We know what what wireless networking is. We know what a touchscreen is. We know what the cameras and the internet and all these things that you need to put this thing into context and understand what it is. And in a lot of ways, I think when we look at the potential sophistication of some of these sites, I think we're in that same position as someone from Victorian era looking at a cell phone. We don't have the context to fully understand it.
I think that's such a great analogy.
May well be
the cell phone.
Parts of science or technologies that were involved in what these sites, how they were made or what they were doing that we don't understand yet. And as you said, even though we think we've got it all figured out,
Dynamics, you're a genius, bro.
We're going to know more in 10 years. We're going to explore the boundaries of science and learn more about the fundamental nature of reality and technology and the principles of the universe in 20 years, 100 years, 1,000 years. So that means that there are probably huge domains of technology and science that are currently outside of our own perspective. And it's very tempting, and a lot of people do when they look back at the past. As you said, they look at it through the lens of our current understanding of technology. So it's as if everything in the past, we're the most superior man that has ever, version of man that's ever existed, right? So therefore, everything in the past must be just a subset of what we know. And it's all explainable, and it can only be explainable within the context of what we know. And I just don't think that's the best way to look at it. I think we need to be a lot more open-minded about the possibilities of what was going on in the past, and consider the possibility that some of those answers might lay outside of our current perspective and our current knowledge set. And that's why I think also if we actually investigate them with that possibility in mind, and we apply ourselves and apply our technology, we might actually learn something. And we're starting to see that with some of the work that's been happening this year that I've been involved in. This in-depth analysis of these pre-dynastic granite vases, and they're just showing these degrees of sophistication and machining and precision that it's completely blowing people's minds all around the world. Like it's certainly not possible to have been done by hand, and it's revealing all of these interesting possibilities about their function or how they were made. And we're learning stuff because we're being open-minded about how investigating these things
what's the emote?
And what the possibilities could be.
And it's stuff I've seen in Egypt too, where there's these quarries where there were obelisks
Whose
left
emote
behind,
is that?
unfinished, if you will. Like they were started to be carved out, and even like hieroglyphs were on them. But
I thought it was toads. That would be a very toad-esque emote.
The ground with their scoop marks,
Filipino
and people are like, how do they do it? And there's even cuts. Like a laser cut or a saw of some sort was cutting through it and stopped. And then like, oops, made a bad cut, went back. And you could see that. They're like, how do you work with some of the toughest, the densest materials on the planet?
Yeah, I mean, granite
hardness. Yeah, exactly. So hard that's not harder than diamonds, but it's up there with diamonds. It's insane.
Well, yeah, so that's one of the interesting things
about Come on.
A lot of the artifacts, particularly in Egypt, although this also applies to South America, is that, they use some of the most difficult stones.
You made them? That's awesome, bro. I believe you made them.
Mediums, if you
say it's lies. She doesn't know because she has to
know. On the
know.
most scale of hardness, your fingernails like a 2.5, and copper is like a 3.5.
Dude, did you hear?
4.5, steel's 5.
Did you hear the conspiracy theory?
6, 7, 8, 9 range.
That.
That are being used.
Will Smith
seem to be no problem in terms of how they're machined. Diamonds are 10.
Will Smith,
the toughest stuff out there.
You probably heard it, and Chris Rock were
they might
paid
have synthesized something these days
by
harder than diamond. I don't know.
Pfizer.
But
because Pfizer was releasing
a
brand new drug for alopecia, which is the condition that his wife has.
Has never been replicated by any hand method, which is what they say.
And this event drew attention and focus to alopecia,
really interesting,
to sell this new drug. And Pfizer was a major sponsor, and you see in the things sponsored by Pfizer.
It's that stuff is.
What do you think?
The conventional explanation for it is, well, it's pounding stones. Is that they took these diorite or dolerite balls and they just pounded away at the granite, and it's what leaves these scoop marks. And there's all sorts of problems with that theory. Not the least.
You're the most sensible person, Moonraker.
I think it's
because I know that's sarcasm.
Conundrum that you see all over the place in the Orthodox story of ancient Egypt, but it's like, well, okay, this is the most primitive method. Yet this is the method you see on the most sophisticated and largest artifacts. It's like how can you
Then
correlate?
Pfizer's releasing a drug
if
for
this is
everything,
the
and
most
they're
primitive
sponsoring
method of
everything
quarrying, literally
always.
pounding on granite with
So
another rock.
no, what?
And of course, you
Like,
do
come on,
progress over
that's not
time.
true.
So while we do the
That's
wedge
fake.
and chisel approach, where we chisel out divots
I
in a
hate this
line, and
fucking
we
game,
put wood
bros.
in and water it, and then hammer in these chisel, try to split the stone, and then you develop
why?
stronger materials like steel and other chisels where you can actually chisel in to the stone. And there's evidence for that sort of work too in that quarry. But they're typically they're getting off little small pieces off these giant artifacts, like the unfinished obelisk, which is 1,200 tons, 1,200 tons is the estimate for its mass. You know, but it's also, they try to explain that with the most primitive quarrying method. It's nonsense. Plus, there's all sorts of other inconsistencies with how those scoop marks are formed. The fact that they run all the way down walls in a straight line, then underneath, and then up under the underside of these artifacts, and you wouldn't have these ridge lines in between the scoop marks. I mean, if you have a shift change and the next guy comes along after 10 hours of pounding, and he picks up the ball and he starts pounding, he's going to pound down those ridges that are in between these scoop marks. I mean, that's where you're going to get the most traction and remove the most material, but that's not what we see.
For a certain amount of money, they would do that.
Lines as if there was a tool that came down and did this in a straight
line.
And
the company to do that would be Pfizer.
Like they start straight in places and they angle over. So you can imagine using like a backhoe arm. Everyone who's used a backhoe will see this. When you cut out straight, it's straight, but as you rotate from that fixed point of reference, the angle shifts on the line that you're cutting.
Right.
And we see evidence for exactly that same sort of thing in these scoop marks. That the angle changes as if that tool was fixed in a certain spot, and then it was operating from there and was articulated, and then it was moved later. There's all these. It's very interesting.
It goes on and on and on.
Yeah.
There's a question I want to ask you, because I've been down to South America. I've been to Machu Picchu. I've been to Machu Picchu, Tulum, Coba, and
keep secret. Will Smith has lost too much
structures. And
you're right, and he's already rich. You're right.
Echoes of
you make a great
Egypt,
point.
no question.
Because he's already rich.
Also, that's another question.
And he has too much to lose.
Around the world where these civilizations should have never ever had some sort
what
of
if they're like mafia?
So
what if Pfizer's like mafia and said you have to
but
do
there's
this?
some of these South American, I think in not
but then if they're mafia, then why would they have to rely on two pop figures making this psyop to sell their drug?
In Machu Picchu, where the stones almost look like they're out of molds, because they are so. It's not like one block on one block. Like in Egypt, you have granite stone, granite stone, and they're all similar shapes, if not almost exactly.
Don't give them the real
same,
quote.
Give or take. But this is like apple, orange, banana, and they all.
I mean, his relationship with his wife was kind of already on the down.
So perfectly together, like they're puzzle pieces.
Like their relationship is not in good shape, unfortunately. Sadly.
How in God's green earth did they do that back then, man?
That is
so maybe it's just like whatever.
And it's one I don't have an answer for, because I'm as mystified.
Wow, insane. Sounds like you know more about it than I do.
So you see, with the megalithic work, I think this is one of the indicators of
she's no Lisa, man.
And you see
she's no Lisa. Let me tell you.
Places like
she's
Peru,
no Lisa.
In the precision of the work. So in Egypt, you have a lot more straight lines and this almost linear megalithic work. Like you say, these are square. A lot of stuff is pretty square and certainly straight.
Who's Lisa? What from Fresh Prince,
very
man?
Precise. You can't even.
That was like Will's girl from Fresh Prince.
You see the same type of precision in Peru and this work.
Strong charactered, intelligent.
But there's no straight lines.
Like
there.
the perfect,
it's literally
the perfect
these
person,
curved features,
the perfect
and
woman.
it's one of the mystifying things to me is like how,
oh shit. Yeah, she's no Lisa. Let me tell you, no way.
Just above Cusco, and you have some of these stones that are 150, 200 tons each. These giant hard forms of limestone.
Lisa's
you have
like
granite stones that are in the streets of Cusco that are multi-ton stones as well, and they just are joined together perfectly, but they have these flowing joints.
This is like the perfect
Dr. Seuss, almost
TV
Dr. Seuss
girl,
style.
you know?
Yeah, it's crazy, and it's not. And I've seen in some places, I actually documented this a few times, where through earthquakes or other
I don't talk
processes,
about
the
that like a
stones are
negative
separated.
thing. It's just
And
on TV,
you can tell, okay, they
don't
didn't
really
just
see the
like make them look
positives
good
and
on
the
the surface,
fakeness.
like as if they were touching on the surface.
especially
That
in the
consistent
sitcom in
joined
the
surface
90s.
actually goes the full depth of the stone. Like
Perfect,
it goes all the
perfect.
way through that depth, which is incredibly difficult to make those mating surfaces match like that.
I don't know.
So a lot of people speculate, okay, well these stones come out of a mold. Are they somehow like a Play-Doh or a toffee-like substance?
Just seem like a Lisa.
Is put in place and then it sets. We don't really have any evidence for that. We don't have any process that can explain that. Intuition tells you that. Like you look at it and you go, man, because the only other idea is, well, you know, they're lifting the stone, like they're looking at it and they're shaving a bit off it and they're working on it and then they put it back. Okay, it's not quite ready, and then you just back and forth and you have to put it in and out 1,000 times to get it even close.
And how heavy are these stones?
Guys, that was
Some of these
tragic.
stones are like a couple hundred tons. I mean, it's actually one now. They're massive. And certainly multi-ton tones. None of this is easy. Like this is, it's really funny actually. I go to Egypt and South America, and they're restoring a lot of these sites like Karnak, and there's literally like a 2 or 3 ton piece of a statue that they were lifted. They had to move at Egypt, and you can see how difficult that is. How much they had to wrap it in these massive, big, you know, strong cables, and then the winch and the machine they needed to lift it and stuff. It's just, it gives you an idea that it's difficult for us to do today. A lot of this work. But it seems to have been just much easier for people in the past because they did it endlessly. South America, Egypt, whatever. And it's just, people have very little appreciation for just how difficult some of these tasks are because they haven't done it themselves or haven't seen how difficult it is for us to do and move things around like that are, you know, multi-ton objects. And funny shapes and stuff. It's crazy. But yeah, I don't know. The South American stuff is fantastic. There is a crossover there. So you do get, in some places in Egypt, you have some of these flowing lines in some places. And in some places in South America, you have straight lines and more linear lines.
Yeah, Chichen Itza's pretty, to my recollection of it, it's pretty, all the blocks are similar sides. They're not like all crazy.
It's not flowing, yeah. Well, I mean, the Coricancha in Peru, the Cusco, is this giant megalithic structure that's of course, it's a Catholic church today, but it's in the center of Cusco, and its origins are megalithic, 100%. But it's much more straight. There's a lot of straight lines in there. In terms, it's very, very similar to Egypt. But then you go into the streets of Cusco, and you know they have this megalithic buildings, and there's these flowing lines, these green granite walls. Just insane. It's just beautiful. Cusco is such an amazing place. If people haven't been, you should go because it's super unique. Like there's literally nowhere else in the world that I know of where you have these architectural styles stacked up on each other like this. You have megalithic, which we don't know how old this is. I think it all gets attributed to the Inca in the mainstream story. I think this is far older than that because you have the megalithic style. Then you have Inca building, which is very rough and very primitive, like local small cobbles and you know mud mortar and things. Then you have colonial Spanish on top of that. Then you have modern. And this is, you just walk around the streets in the center of Cusco and it's just all stacked up on top of each other everywhere you look. It's actually, it's unique and it's amazing.
Have you ever heard of Coral Castle?
Yes, I have.
So have you been to Coral Castle?
I have not.
So I'm from South Florida, so I've been there multiple times. And for everyone who doesn't know about Coral Castle, please Google Coral Castle in South Florida because it is megalithic construction in the 50s.
Yeah, Edward Leeds Garland is the name.
That's right. Yeah, that was his name. Yes, and he was moving around coral rocks.
Yeah, it's a limestone. It's a form of limestone, I believe.
Yeah, and it's everywhere down in South Florida. That's why Coral Gables is called Coral Gables. It's because it was built on the foundation of these rocks. But he built an entire town, like a little town, and giant table, 2-story buildings, and a 5-ton door that was perfectly aligned.
Yeah.
So he could. All you have to do with one finger, you can move it. Yeah. And he said when people are, and he did it by himself.
He's a very secretive guy. Yeah.
And he said, "How do you do it?" He goes, "I learned the secrets of how they built the pyramids." That's all he would say.
Yeah. Well, I have a different opinion on Coral Castle. It is. Look, that was one thing I would say about this. It is. Leith Scarlin was, I mean, a savant in this space. Like he spent, and it was his life's work. Like obviously his passion. And it's a tremendous achievement any way you cut it. However, there is footage that's emerged, I think, in the last few years that I've seen of him using block and tackles and massive A-frames, which have no problem lifting the sort of weights that we're talking about. I don't think it's as mysterious as some people put it. That's all I'd say about it. I don't want to take away from the achievement. It's an incredible achievement.
Right.
But I don't think it's this, like, people show pictures of his workshop and think he was using some sort of magical Tesla energy and all this other stuff. I don't think that's what's going on. I think he was very dedicated, very hardworking, very secretive and enigmatic in his answers and how he did stuff. But there is some footage you can see him using kind of modern materials and tools to do it. But you know, it's a lifetime of work, and he's very skilled. And I mean, I do want to go see it at some point. I've not had the chance.
It's pretty remarkable. It's a pretty remarkable.
That's my opinion.
Yeah, and
it's very remarkable. It's remarkable, but I don't think it's like, I don't
magical.
think it's
fucking great start.
Right, and I'd have to agree with you on it. I think when you're there and you start looking at things, and maybe your trained eye would look at it a little bit differently than mine, but I was there. I've been there probably half a dozen times in my life, and I've really just been I mean, you're fascinated with it when you're there, but when you see the construction of some stuff that he was able to do, I mean, there's a castle, like there's like a 2-story castle that he carved out or did something with. Every hurricane that's hit Florida.
Oh, that's not going anywhere. Yeah.
It does nothing. Like category 6, it doesn't matter. It just sits there and it doesn't even think about it.
Well, that's the reason. That's the reason why. I mean, that people say, "Why didn't they pyramids only build stuff out of other materials?" I'm like, well, if you want something to last, make it out of stone.
Hard stone. On top of that, hard stone that's not gonna wear down in 5 years. Yeah, that's the other thing. Like a lot of the stuff that we have built today. I mean, if we left the Earth today, if we just, for whatever reason, humans just left the Earth today, what do we got? 1,000 years maybe before everything starts turning to dust?
Couple thousand. Give it a couple thousand years. That's nothing.
Yeah, like I mean, the nature will take it over. There was a show. I don't know if you ever saw this show on History Channel. You know what I'm talking about? Like if people left, and they would just take a new city around the world in the episode and just say, after 500 years, after 1,000 years. The one that really got me, the structure that we have built, humans have built, that will last the longest before it goes, is the Hoover Dam.
Why?
Yeah.
And I was just at the Hoover Dam like a few weeks ago and you sit there and going, oh wow, the last place to lose power will be Vegas. Because
of the hydroelectric.
Until they finally crack them. So without maintenance, they'll eventually pop.
Yeah.
But the machine itself, they said it would take hundreds, if not a long time before it actually breaks.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting, right? I love that theory. Like, so say we have a civilization end and we go away, like you said. I mean, metal and cities, that's all gone. 1,000, 2,000, no problem. Like nothing remains.
Without a cataclysm. Without a cataclysm.
Without a cataclysm, just assuming we just leave. Yeah. And all the people are gone. Yeah, it's done. And then you have the Hoover Dam, and then you've got Mount Rushmore. That would erode eventually, but people might see that thousands of years in the future and go, because I think it's granite. You know, they're looking at it and going, oh man, these are the gods or whatever.
The gods
on this carved into this mountain. You know, you've got. I love this idea, like the Hoover Dam.
And then we couldn't even finish Mount Rushmore. Mount Rushmore was supposed to be a huge thing at the bottom too, with like suits and stuff.
I think I can imagine an argument in the future. Like imagine, we go thousands of years past, some other civilization, they arise and they have their.
They just left all the rubble at the bottom. And it looks
the
like
bones of our civilization. There's probably a bunch of people on whatever the version of the internet is the future making this case that these people were advanced. They dug a trench between the oceans, and then you've got all the mainstream archaeology going, no, this is just natural. This is nothing.
That's hilarious, bro.
And the people on the internet going, no, the evidence is there. Look at it. Like this is a straight line between these.
God bless America.
And then they look at Mount Rushmore, and you barely can see the features, but there's something there that looks like a human face. It's like, obviously that's not natural.
It's impressive,
that's
for
natural.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk.
The Hoover Dam.
Apparently, the native Indians are really upset that they drilled into the supposed to be a sacred site for them.
Stand on it and see the stars. Like that's why they made.
You look on Google Earth, it's like the most
all.
magnificent granite outcrop in the region.
Simple, but what's really fascinating about this conversation right now is if you start looking at the lens of how another civilization would look at our
and we have some of those in Canada
argue
too.
About things that for you
and
I
would
just
understand
no, that's
why people would be upset with
Dam.
Mount
Obviously,
Rushmore.
this is a phone. obviously, because we have context.
That's right.
But you bring a native from
especially how Indians are being
Amazon,
treated by the
seen
people that built Mount
a white
Rushmore.
man before, and you throw them into Vegas, they're going to be like, what? Like they wouldn't even.
Planet.
It's essentially another planet. So it's all about context.
Yeah, I mean, really. even if we survive, like you say, we have a cataclysm, but it's a civilization-ending cataclysm. We are blasted back to the Stone Age, which is what I think happened to us in the past. Graham Hancock calls us a species with amnesia, and it's a great term because we have these echoes
such a tragedy,
that come down through these origin stories and these tales and these myths. And
whatever,
legends.
we can go faster.
But say we do survive this, but we're knocked back into a basically hunter-gatherer lifestyle. Within a couple generations, things like plasma TVs and cell phones are going to be these campfire stories. They're going to
still would have been nice to have that, though.
People have this memory of it, so they find black
That
rocks,
was my fastest
they get
pace ever.
themselves some obsidian, and they polish it up and they shape it up to look kind of like this, and they dance around the fire with it and try to activate it through
100%.
ceremony and ritual. And I genuinely think that's a lot of what's happened when we look at dynastic Egypt.
Re-entering
they
the
inherited
vents
stuff like that. They
after
probably
the
had a cultural
upload.
connection to the precursor civilization. They got a lot from them. They got knowledge and information, but they just didn't have any capability to use it or the context to understand it. So it all became ceremonial. Like these sites became ceremonial sites. In the same way that we might go into the cities if we were hunter-gatherers, all the Hoover Dam, places like that, and start to worship them, and then as we grow and the kings and our warlords and our people emerge, like I'm going to write my name on this. This is mine now. Like this is my site, and my name's on this now, and so therefore I made it. And thousands of years later, that's how we'd look at it and say, well, that guy's name's on it. He must have built it. It must have been made for him, and that's exactly what we do. That's exact because we look at the ruins and the megaliths of the past and these statues and stuff. And if there's a dude's name on it, like then he had it built for sure. He had it built. That's how Egyptology works. That's the name, and there's lots of contradictions there too. Like some artifacts have 3 or 4 or 5 different names on them. Because
every time a new guy came up, he's like, oh, that's mine. I did that.
Yeah, Ramses II's notorious for this. Petrie called him the Great Usurper. He would literally erase people's names and dig his own name in really deeply. And you can think about it with these artifacts. I like the idea that these vases, these precision vases that come from pre-dynastic times, like a lot of them are in private collection. Imagine there's some rich private collector that builds himself a mausoleum and he wants to be buried with his vases in today's time.
Yeah.
But then we dig him up in the future 1,000, 4,000 years later, 5,000 years later, and he's found with these artifacts. So like, well, he had these made. That's right. What we do. That's how we look at that. We have no idea whether he had them made or not. And in this case, no, those things are probably 10 or 15,000 or 5,000 years old already when they were buried with them. I think that's entirely the case. We should be considering that possibility when we look at the bones of some of these ancient civilizations like Egypt that have all these contradictions.
We should engrave the elite rankings into Ayers Rock. What do you think?
The Incas and the Maya and the
big ass.
The Egyptians.
The Elite.net rankings board,
and then kind of try to build upon
right
that.
In the middle of Ayers Rock.
Let's just say 2,000
I love
years,
it. That could be the pilgrimage site.
In the last
That's probably the best spot because there won't be glaciers.
Knowledge has been lost.
It won't erode from rain.
I mean, the farther back you go, it gets thinner and thinner. But like, look how much information we have right now. I mean, we have a lot of knowledge and information about the way the world works, to our understanding to this point at least. The way the world works, but things like the Vedic text, things like the Alexandria, and then let's not even go into what we lost with the Mayans when the Spanish burned everything.
Me too.
Yeah, exactly. So there's so much knowledge.
The issue is that times always change. People will always get balked. You know what I mean? It'll be a constant gardening thing forever.
Another human to teach them.
We can train people to become stonemasons.
Of people who've never.
Yeah, I was thinking about this recently.
And people are like, and we're trying to explain to them the internet. We're trying to explain to them basic knowledge through story.
Are you like native? That's cool if you are.
We would be gods.
That's really dope if you are.
You would be, and you would probably, and that's exactly kind of.
It'd be amazing if you are.
Well, I mean, this is.
It's okay. You're amazing just the way you are.
Description of how knowledge is actually passed down before we had like writing and ways of storing it through oral tales and legends, and it's you know, that's what ends up as the origin stories. It ends up being put in books. It's these stories that are, and it's an interesting analysis. Like when you look at von Deschen, like books like Hamlet's Mill, that show you that there's this astronomical data encoded in these legends, myths from Norse.
Oh, really?
Like,
are you
Inuit
serious?
Traditions, South American traditions, like the
why was he like
the Middle Eastern religions,
slave owner?
There's all this data that is similar across them, but they're tied up in these stories and these myths and legends. The same thing. I think with recollections of events, you don't just tell people, here's the data. Like,
I don't know, man. That's what they do in the U.S., man.
The sky
they're tearing down Confederate
the planets move like
generals' statues.
That data gets wrapped
in
up
Virginia.
in these interesting stories, and there's
crazy.
figures are created.
I mean, I don't know much about. I didn't study the Civil War. I don't know if it really was about slavery or not.
And make it memorable, and then that's
if it was, then
down
it's pretty terrible.
Generation through time. That's how.
I hear it's not.
Is kind of
could be wrong.
So when we look at origin stories and some of the myths and legends from the past,
but there are people like that.
Okay,
places especially in Brazil and South America.
Of this and try to get to the core of it. What is the seed or the truth?
Oh my God. The great conquerors,
that is probably
the great
true at its core.
murderers.
And there's a lot of that going on. Like science.
The great passing away.
More than we'd like to think, I think. In science had a bit of an overcorrection with the Age of Reason, right? Because if you go back before the Age of Reason and the rise of science, literally the explanation for our past and our history and our place on the planet was biblical. Like it was the religions. Like it's this 6,000 year story. It's the giant floods. It's this cataclysmic story, and that's let's just take Christianity for the purpose of this. And then science comes in and says, okay, no, we actually want to get away from the cataclysm, like the catastrophism and the cataclysmic nature of religious stories and things like that.
That's
and
they
kind of overcorrected and shifted, and they just wrote off everything that's included in those origins and religions. And the truth somewhere in the middle now. I think we're starting to swing back the other way, where it's like, okay, does erosion and gradualism and can we explain stuff through and the world as it is through these through these gentle sort of processes we see acting.
Sounds like a decent human being.
Yeah, a lot of it we can, but there's also other features
that I have no idea.
Are showing us the truth of some of the cataclysm that was maybe contained in these origin stories and religions.
Did he find the rock? Was he the first Westerner, British, Australian to find the rock?
Where we just dismissed this history that was contained in these origin stories, when I think in reality there's some grains of truth that are there that if we pay attention to it we can find them. But yeah, I mean,
and were there natives when he found it? That's the question.
That's
the big question.
People know. I
understand.
Of Alexandria, but there was literally dozens and dozens of events like that where we had other repositories of knowledge that went up in flames. That was just one. I mean,
and of course the archives of the Vatican right now, who had a couple things.
Hidden knowledge is another thing. Yes, 100%. What I wouldn't give to be able to go in there and read everything. Well, you mean. Probably all in Latin, but a lot of it's probably in other languages and Aramaic and things. But it'd be interesting to know what's in there for sure.
Well, I mean, look, when I went into the Vatican Museum and you're just walking around, I'm like, how much did they steal? I mean, they stole so much. It's obscene how much stuff is in the Vatican Museum. It's one of the greatest museums I've ever walked into. Yeah. In the sense of just the scope of the collection. But as I'm walking through it, I'm like, this is literally 2,000 years.
Oh, let's go, baby.
Of raping and pillaging. Of all of these artifacts and knowledge and books and stories that they're like, no, this can't get out. Let's just put that in. It's very Indiana Jones-esque.
Oh, for sure. No, I think there's a lot of truth to that. It's funny, there is, if you get approved, that's a weird thing about the Vatican archives that I've heard, like assuming you even get approved to be on the list to even request access to it, you kind of have to be specific about what you want. So you almost need to kind of have an idea about what's in there before you can even get
right. Like,
there's no one gets.
I don't know.
Well, that's the thing. Yeah, you got to have an understanding of a historical document that might be in there, and then get approved to say, "Oh, I'm interested in this." If you've got it, kind of thing. But no one ever gets approved to I just want to see what's in there. No. That's not happening. Yeah, I don't know, man. There's definitely, I think, a case to be made for a lot of like hidden knowledge and stuff that is it's in very select hands, and that comes to us from the dim, dark, distant past. I mean, a few bits and pieces get out here and there that are really interesting to me. I've been fascinated by ancient maps. I mean, I think there's a lot of data encoded in ancient maps that are typically the ancient maps that we have were drawn from even more ancient source maps that are all lost, but they show massive sophistication in the fact that we knew where Antarctica was and Australia was well before these were supposedly discovered in our time. They were able to do things like map longitude very accurately, which is not something we were able to do until like the turn of the 19th century. James Cook's second voyage of discovery, you've got longitude. I mean, it requires sophisticated timepieces to measure longitude and navigate with longitude, which we weren't able to do until around 1800. But you go back thousands of years before that, and there's evidence that they were very capable of doing longitude accurately. You know, you've got the coastline of Antarctica, what's beneath the ice today is very accurately represented on some of these maps. Stuff like this. There's these crazy, very, very interesting data sets that can be found with analysis of ancient maps.
When do you think Antarctica was not under ice?
It depends on what part of it you're talking about. This is not an area that I'm particularly knowledgeable on. For sure, I mean, we do have glacial records of ice where we can drill down to bedrock to go back like 300,000-400,000 years. I think the ice core records, off the top of my head, I might be wrong, but I think some of the ice core samples do go back around 400,000 years. So we know there's been ice being laid down for at least that long.
In some areas, but not in all.
But in some areas, right? In some, but not in all. I mean, that's the thing you see on some of these maps that John Hapgood was the guy who exposed the fact that the Piri Reis map accurately depicts the coastline of Queen Maud's Land on Antarctica, but not only that, it shows rivers and mountains and territory like this. And then that was actually confirmed by an Air Force reconnaissance squadron, and these literally guys that spend their lifetime looking at maps and analyzing maps, and they did the comparison. And like, our only conclusion is that yes, this is the coast of Antarctica, but it shows what's beneath the ice. And this was confirmed by like sonar readings, because today there's ice on top of it, and they use these sonar and radar techniques or whatever to actually look at the land, and they go, yep, this actually matches what's on this map. And the Piri Reis maps made by Admiral Piri Reis, I think in the 1500s, that he actually says and writes on there that no, he most of it he built from more ancient source maps that are all gone now. We don't know how old they are, where they came from. They're probably copies of the older stuff too. But yeah, I mean, so I don't know. I mean, that 400,000 years is actually not out of the realm of possibility to me, because one of the other things that's happened in the last
I don't think I hit him, did I? He just stopped running.
That the human race is
I thought I hit him.
I mean, you go
that's
back,
why I
fuck off. Obviously, the biblical version is 6,000
years
old.
Obviously.
And then it was for a long time. It was suspected to be around 50,000 years, and then we found some after the advent of like C14 radiocarbon dating. I think there were some remains found in Ethiopia that put us at around 190,000 years. That was the oldest thing in the fossil record. Then, not that long ago, they found some remains in Morocco that put us back to around 300,000 years. That was the oldest, a jawbone that was the oldest thing in the fossil record. That still is, I think, the oldest thing in the fossil record. But now we've got DNA evidence and statistical studies into things like teeth morphology. And we can look at like when we split from a common ancestor, like Neanderthals and us being cousins, we split from a common ancestor, and we can look at kind of our genetic past and DNA. And both the teeth morphology studies and the DNA studies put us in the 800,000 to 900,000 year range. So I think let's set it a round number, an upper limit of around 1 million years old as a species. So all of a sudden, Antarctica being free of ice 400,000 years ago isn't out of the realm of possibility for humans. And not only humans, but we're the last humans left. Like, there's other Neanderthals, Denisovans, all these other versions of essentially Homo sapiens that we don't know much about. And Neanderthals, bigger brains than we had. Who knows how civilized they might have gotten given time and place and energy and enough food to eat in nice weather. We used to think they couldn't speak. And of course, speech is vital for civilization and for developing abstract concepts and communication. I think the nomenclature on that's changed now. We do think that they could speak. So maybe they had language. Maybe they had communication. Like, we just don't know. And I think these are all possibilities. And some of those species go back millions of years.
Do you think that our civilizations have been built and wiped out, built and wiped out, built and wiped out, and started from scratch? This kind of cycling system has been around for much longer than we even can conceive, maybe even 100 or 200 or possibly even longer. I'm not saying that 500,000 years ago that we were advanced civilizations.
Right.
Hey, as we've been discussing, maybe we were, and all the information was lost because there's no way that any of that stuff would have made it this long. So it's a fascinating intellectual exercise in your head. But it seems to me that there's definitely a lot that we still don't know, for sure.
100%. That's I think the. I try to say that. I mean, I don't speculate a lot, and I'd like to say I don't know when I don't know, and I think that's what's missing a lot from. Let's just say that the mainstream version of history, and I think to some extent that's a product of the rise of the alternative authors and theories that are coming from guys like Graham Hancock and Beauval and John Anthony West, these guys. I think that the response and the popularity of that and it has led to a much more authoritarian response from the academics who see themselves as owning the field. Like they think, well, I'm the gatekeeper of history. I tell you what the history is and what history of civilization is. Because back in the day, in the Victorian times, when this discussion was contained to these academic halls of residence, I mean, they were, and you can read it when you read the works of those people, and I have, and it's, they knew when there was something they didn't know. They were open about, like, well, we don't know. I mean, like Flinders Petrie was like, he couldn't explain some of the things he was finding from an engineering perspective. He's like, I don't know. But today, I think because there's a popularity of these, and the rise of this, I guess, the alternate history field, you have a much more authoritarian response from the academics, and they're much more likely to say, no, we know the answer. They're not going to say, I don't know, when I think the reality is that they don't know. And I think that would be better if we all.
I think he's hitting it right on the head here, that we really don't know. The authoritarian,
in terms of
this is kind of an overcorrection.
And this is an interesting point, because I think this is one of the reasons why this is a very important field and a very important discussion and investigation. I would say I think we've been through at least one cycle. I think at least there's evidence for at least one, and there may be more. Like we could have been through a cycle of civilization to cataclysm and then back again more than once, but for sure I think there's evidence for at least once, one decent one, where it's like, okay, we were pretty advanced. We got knocked back down to Stone Age, essentially hunter-gatherer lifestyles, and now what we term modern history, our own history, the last 6,000 to 7,000 years. That's our rise from that event. Now, they might have been precipitated by 10 or 15 or 20 or however many tens of thousands of years of just survival mode for humanity, where it's very primitive. I don't know when that fall took place. It could have been the Younger Dryas, but it could have also been events that preceded it. And we know there were events preceding that, the Bolling Alarod. There's all sorts of climate upheavals if you go back further in time. But it's an important discussion, because I think if more people understood that this was the cycle, that where our civilization, as advanced as we are, isn't the only way of doing it. I think a lot of people, we at some level, you get taught in school, this is civilization. Like, this is what it means to be a modern human. Like, we went from the Stone Age to the space shuttle in this 6,000 year period, this almost linear straight path. I mean, it's obviously not linear, but we've gone from Stone Age to the space shuttle in 6,000 years. This is what it means to be an advanced civilization. This is the only way that civilization is done, is the way that we've done it. And you can just put out of your mind that there are other alternatives or other possibilities. And so we just go on with our daily lives, and that's just a fundamental tenet of what it means to be a modern human. Now, I think if you taught a different message in schools, if we understood that no, in fact, rather than this linear path, we're on this cycle between civilization and cataclysm, and there are other ways of doing civilization.
What the
there
fuck
are
is
other
this?
technologies. There's other ways of living.
Why?
There's other you know, there's other possibilities, and on a long enough timescale, we're coming back around to this cataclysm part, and that it will end. Like, there is a definite risk of it ending. I think it could help to change our priorities as a species. Like, because, you know, people don't think about that sort of long-term future. It's just like, what's the next quarterly
right.
you know, results in the next political or election cycle or whatever. We're not thinking long-term. I'd like to think if you could have this change in the zeitgeist about what it means to be a modern human, and this our place on this cycle, it might help us in the long term to change our priorities and spend a little less money on tanks and a little bit more money on space exploration and solving some of the longer-term problems that face us as a species. And I actually think there's precedent for this too, for this type of ground shift in awareness and a new topic and a new awareness changing our behavior. And the example I'd like to use is climate change. Now, whether you agree with it or not, I mean, it's no doubt politicized and it's a controversial topic for a lot of people, but my point is that in the last 20 or 30 years, like that word, what the word climate change means, has shifted and changed, and it's undeniable that it's changing our behavior. It changes our investment decision, it changes our interactions with each other, it changes how we interact with the planet, it changes our behavior. And that's all because it's been this shift in awareness that's happened in the zeitgeist of humanity. It's a new idea that's come in and it's altered our behavior in fundamental ways, similar to the internet and things like that. And I just, as altruistic as it is, I do think that if we understood our past and we taught this at a fundamental level, that we're on this cycle, that it could actually have a similar effect. It could alter our behavior. And I think that's why I think this whole discussion is an important one. And finding out the truth about our history is not just an academic exercise. It's actually important for our future.
What is your opinion of the impact of these kind of conversations to our understanding of our spiritual side, our spiritual understanding of the grand scheme of why we're even here, where we have been, where we're going, what is the purpose of this giant video game that we're all playing? You know, you and I are both Mario and Luigi, just trying to save a princess from Donkey Kong, essentially.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So what is... All these conversations are fascinating and intriguing intellectually, but on a spiritual standpoint, what can this do, and what is this doing, these conversations doing for our spirituality?
I think it's helping to connect us to it. I would suspect. I think that this is a huge part in that. I mean, there's no doubt been a disconnection from spirit and from spirituality in our modern civilization. Like we've gotten further and further from that type of thing. Although does seem to be a renaissance in those concepts, and modern shamanism, if you will. And I think this exposure to this discussion, and certainly the deeper you get into it, I think the more those elements of it come out. Like there's a huge spiritual connection you find in these ancient cultures and in their civilizations, the way they operated. Like we're a little different in our civilization in that we seem to be deliberately shifting away from that and only valuing this kind of, you know, alert problem-solving states of consciousness, and there's other benefits that come from other states of consciousness that almost every other culture and civilization seems to have recognized and spent some effort developing and looking into. We're a bit different from that. I also think that, just personally speaking, that I think these types of investigations and this path to trying to find the answer, I think that is part of a spiritual journey as well, like you know, being on the path kind of thing, like finding meaning in your life and finding meaning in your pursuits and in your interests. I think that for a lot of people, this type of a discussion and these topics help to fill that role, because I believe we're spiritual beings as well. We're not just meat and bone and flesh, and you know, we need to find purpose. Human beings need something to do. They need to find purpose. If you are purposeless, you know, you're not generally very happy. It's not a great place to be, and it's hard to find purpose in some of the modern in the modern world. It can be a real challenge for a lot of people, and I think a lot of the distractions, and this might me personally speaking with this, I think the distractions and the entertainment and the things that are thrown at you as, just to fill that void in the modern world, celebrity culture and consumerism and things like this, they don't really give you purpose, and I think a lot of the purpose that we're fed when we go through the education system that sets us up to be this cog in a machine and teaches us consumerism and to get the next thing and to make more money and to just climb the corporate ladder and be a good worker, all these sort of things, ultimately don't really tick that box when it comes to purpose, and in fact can be a little destructive. I mean, there's obviously lots of destructive elements about our society, as nice as it is in the West, at least, and in the first world countries, to have, I do believe that it is the best time to be alive still.
Come on, man.
I hold that opinion. Like, I'm not naive enough to think that hot water and plumbing and the internet's not a good thing. It makes life convenient, but it's in a lot of ways antithetical to finding purpose and achieving something. I mean, I think that's part of that spiritual journey, and for me at least, and I think for a lot of people, these conversations and this topic help to fill that, because I really do think there's something to being on the path and trying to get to these answers. Whether we ever get to them or not, that's not the important part. It's about being on that path and trying to seek that knowledge and to understand it.
Now I'm going to ask you a few questions to ask all my guests, because I can't talk to you for another 4 or 5 hours. Sure. And you will definitely come back on the show, because we haven't even touched ancient India or Japan or China or all these other sites that I would love to talk to you about.
Kalasasai Caves, check them out.
I mean, they're insane. It's just so much stuff.
Barabar as well.
So there's tons and tons. So we'll have you back without question.
Yep.
But these are questions I ask all my guests. How do you define, what is your definition of living a fulfilled life?
Definition of living a fulfilled life. Well, we just kind of touched on. I think it's finding purpose. I think finding purpose is about the most you can hope for. I mean,
there's no way he's still alive. How many times are you going to hit him?
You have to tick the basic boxes of like food, shelter, the physiological needs.
Oh, because of the lag, because I didn't pass away the other guard at the beginning.
As complex sort of thinking animals, what we are, finding purpose, I think, is about all you can ask in terms of fulfillment and finding life. And at least for me, that's how I see it.
If you could go back in time and speak to little Ben, what advice would you give him?
Like, cheer up, it'll be okay. Depends how little we're talking. But then,
5-year-old Ben, 5-year-old, 6-year-old
Ben. Oh man, I barely remember that guy. Yeah. Don't take things too seriously. Would probably be a good one. That would probably be about it.
How do you define God or source?
The universe, nature, I think. I mean, that would be about it. I do. Yeah, it's hard to think that everything is a giant cosmic accident. I'd say that.
Right. Yeah.
But
regardless if you believe or you don't believe.
Source is a thing. Yeah, I think that's the universe. Like, we're expressions of it in a lot of ways.
And what is the ultimate purpose of life?
You ask the easy questions. The ultimate purpose of life, to be lived, is what I'd say. That's what it's for. To be appreciated and to be lived. It's a gift. I genuinely believe that. Like, to be born into a human body, and to have the privilege and experience of life, and and for it, it can be miserable for a lot of people and short and nasty. But if that's not your experience, it's a real privilege, and it should be lived and not wasted.
And where can people find out more about you and the amazing work you're doing?
Thank you. UnchartedX.com is the main place. I publish all my videos are there. Obviously on YouTube, it's youtube.com/c/UnchartedX. I also stream live on Twitch a couple times a week. And you can find all those details generally below my videos, as well as my social medias, Twitters and Instagrams and things like that.
And do you have any parting messages for the audience?
Keep an open mind. Dig into this stuff. Keep an open mind, and that would be the main thing. Is just keep an open mind about this stuff, as I try to, and not be fixed in your ideas. Like I've opinions change. New data can always change. Can change what we know. The next spade full of dirt from the archaeologists might completely change our perspective on history. We don't know. So I try to keep an open mind.
Stay curious, as they say. Stay curious.
Indeed.
It has been a pleasure talking to you, man. I look forward to our next conversation, brother. Thank you for fighting the good fight.
Thanks, Alex. Good to talk to you, man.
Thanks for watching. Click on one of the videos below to continue your journey, and don't forget to subscribe.
in very
Click on one of the videos below to continue your journey, and don't forget to subscribe.
Headlines reveal even more sensational scientific research behind it, and this is the this is a little extract from the scientific research. There's been this long-held view that there was a single origin for all Native American peoples, and that nevertheless that view has been challenged by some. But advances in DNA technology are making these kind of explorations much more possible. And what's been discovered is this very puzzling connection between peoples of Australasia, particularly Papua New Guinea, and certain tribes deep in the Amazon rainforest. Now, this is a real mystery, because the view, I'll come to that, what makes it even more of a mystery is further research in 2018 on members of these tribes, and looking for ancient skeletal remains. They found ancient skeletal remains 10,400 years old in the Amazon, which bear that same signal. And this tells us that this Aboriginal connection reached South America very, very long ago, and researchers are agreed that it must have reached South America in the late Pleistocene, which is near the end of the last ice age. It's a very important study, because it establishes that there's no recent connection here. This is a very ancient connection in South America. And it really creates a problem, because the view of archaeology for decades, really a century, has been that all the peopling of the Americas happened this way, that they crossed the Bering Straits, which were a land bridge during the Ice Age. Sea level was lower then, and that they traveled through North America and eventually down into South America. The problem is that this genetic signal isn't found anywhere in North America. It's only found in South America and in Papua New Guinea and neighboring areas. And I talked to Eski Willislev, who's one of the world's leading geneticists, whose recent work focuses on the peopling of the Americas. And I'll just read a bit of this email exchange. Willislev told me that currently no one has a good explanation of the Austro-Melanesian signal. All that's put forward as possible explanations are purely speculative. What we do know is that it's present in some Native American groups, particularly from Brazil. We also know it has to be pre-Columbian. Amongst the possible explanations for the presence of this Australo-Melanesian DNA in the Amazon, Professor Willislav offered in his email exchange with me the following. Someone holding this signal comes into the Americas not through Beringia, but crossing into South America across the ocean. Based purely on the genetic data, this is the most parsimonious explanation, but it does not make practical sense. So I asked Eski why it doesn't make practical sense. Is he basing that on the archaeological consensus that our upper Paleolithic and early Holocene ancestors were incapable of undertaking long transoceanic voyages? And his reply, in regard to crossing the Pacific, I'm not saying it did not happen, but there is no evidence suggesting that humans were capable of such a journey until quite late in history, the Polynesian expansion. It's a possibility, and I'm open to the idea, but there's not much evidence supporting it, except going for the most parsimonious solution of the genetic data. Well, let me say right at the outset that in science, parsimony is looked for. It's best to look for the easiest and most direct and most simple explanation of something, rather than elaborating huge other explanations. And this mysterious genetic signal in South America is best explained because none of it's in North America, by a crossing of the Pacific during the Ice Age, which supposedly our ancestors were incapable of doing. So we're in the habit of dividing the world into the New World and the Old World. And it's generally held, it's generally been the view that all civilization began in the Old World. And this book, History Begins at Sumer, by Professor Samuel Noah Kramer, is a hugely influential text. And basically what he's saying is that Sumer, ancient Sumer in Mesopotamia, was the first human civilization. first organization of human beings that deserved to be called a civilization. And it's still influential, even though it was first published in 1956. And indeed, this part of the old world is a center of civilization. There's no doubt about it. I mean, there's the Sumerian Empire, and up there we have the incredible site of Göbekli Tepe between the headwaters of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. They call this area Mesopotamia because it means between the rivers. Can't help feeling that there's some connection between what happened in Sumer and what happened much earlier in Göbekli Tepe. But the new evidence from the Americas threatens to overturn this paradigm that places the origins of civilization in the Middle East. The world was so different during the last ice age. There were ice caps 3 kilometers deep. Sea level was 400 feet lower than it is today. And there were freezing temperatures. But then, really rather abruptly, around 11,600 years ago, the Ice Age came to an end. And the whole face of the world changed. Everything became different, and we start to look at the world as we see it today. So there is the conventional notion. There's the Bering Straits now, and there's how they were during the Ice Age. And it did seem obvious to archaeologists that this must have been the main route for getting into the Americas, and indeed for a long time they held it was the only route for getting into the Americas. And there was a theory that there had been an ice-free corridor between the Cordillera and the Laurentide ice sheets. That theory, by the way, has been recently completely blown out of the water. Nobody could have used that ice-free corridor because it didn't exist.
Like what? Come on,
here's the general picture of these migrations and through that supposed ice-free corridor and down into North America about 12,000 years ago, and then eventually onwards into South America. It's these genetic discoveries of this close relationship between Australasians and certain peoples in the Amazon rainforest that are challenging the long-held view of the peopling of the Americas. The long-held view became a dogma, and that dogma was called Clovis first. These were supposed to be the Clovis culture, were supposed to be the first inhabitants of North America. And they're not supposed to have come into North America until around 13,400 years ago. And mysteriously, 12,800 years ago, they vanish entirely from the stage. They're recognized by these fantastic fluted points that they made. So they were held to be the first culture of the Americas, and for decades, archaeologists were adamant that no human beings had entered the Americas before 13,400 years ago. But things are beginning to change. This is a report from 2013. Not so long ago, there was a seemingly incontrovertible answer to the question of how and when the first settlers made it to the Americas. Some 13,000 years ago, a group of people from Asia walked across a land bridge that connected Siberia to Alaska and headed south. And these people were known to us as the Clovis. By the way, why do we call them the Clovis culture? They didn't call themselves that. We have no idea what they called themselves that. I'll tell you why. Because there's a site called Blackwater Draw.
Dude, I have a garbage bag full of clothes that I'm going to donate to Value Village, where Toad actually ironically also worked.
The problem was there was no beer
with my Stericycle when I jacket
where there was beer available was in the town of Clovis, New Mexico.
Stuff I used when I was a driver picking up that biomedical waste from hospitals that Dick would incinerate.
Yeah.
Toad would incinerate.
For decades, this was the received wisdom. So compelling was the Clovis first model that few archaeologists even contemplated.
I can't believe he did that job, man.
Some with the temerity to do so.
And then on his breaks,
complained of a Clovis
he would come in and talk and chat for like half an hour, and then he'd go back to work.
And believe me, the Clovis police
12 hours.
was a real thing. It wrecked the lives
The
of quite a number of
biomedical waste of
archaeologists who took a dissenting
Toronto
view and
area.
held that it was absurd to suggest that the Americas had only been populated 13,000 years ago. Of course, they'd been populated earlier. And Jacques Cinq-Mars, who conducted excavations at Bluefish Caves in the Yukon, found evidence of the presence of humans in the Americas more than 20,000 years
Oh, for sure. Just the volume,
That
just
was
everything.
heresy
It's just
to the Clovis police. They descended upon
Even
him.
if you have plastic
They
containers
recruited their
with
friends in the
screw-on
media
lids, just
to
shit
attack
happens
him,
all the time.
to present
All
him
the
as a
time.
pseudoscientist,
Things like
to say
plastic
that
falls
he was
off
telling lies,
a
to say
pallet,
that he
it
was
breaks.
fraudulently presenting evidence.
You know, a
They did
plastic bucket
everything
falls, it
possible,
cracks,
to
leaks.
ruin his career. And as the
Usually there's a
Smithsonian
bag,
later
you
admitted,
bag it in, and then
rather
you
than
bucket it
launching
with
a major new
vermiculite, but I
search for
mean...
more early evidence, the finds stirred fierce opposition and a bitter debate, one of the most acrimonious and unfruitful in all of science,
boxes.
as Nature later put it.
So these boxes,
And poor Jacques Cinq
these
Mars,
needles.
he was ruined
These
by the
fucking
Clovis
used
police.
needles.
His research funding was withdrawn. He was passed
These
by in
bins.
corridors by colleagues who would no longer speak to him. He was treated
gloves
as a
that do
pariah.
nothing.
He,
The gloves literally do nothing.
in every way, was insulted and
It's
humiliated.
like fucking
But
radioactive,
he
man.
was right. But he was right. Because bluefish caves were re-excavated. And we now know that people were butchering horses and other animals in bluefish caves 24,000 years ago.
These gloves, they do
Jacques Cinq Mars
nothing.
was totally correct. And this more recent research...
No, they're like carbon.
vindicates
Okay, what they give
Too
is
late to
they
save him
give
from the
latex,
destruction of his career
and then
that
underneath,
fellow
that's
archaeologists
underneath,
inflicted.
and then on top you give this like carpentry.
As the
It's like
Smithsonian
cut-resistant carpentry,
admitted in
Kevlar, but I
2017,
mean,
the
I don't
study
know.
does
The
raise
Kevlar, yeah,
serious
but
questions
they're not
about
giving
the
away
effect of the bitter
Kevlar gloves all the
decades-long
time. You have to buy your
debate
own
over the
Kevlar,
peopling
man.
of a new world. Did
You're not using
archaeologists in the
Kevlar.
mainstream marginalize dissenting
You're
voices
just
on
not.
this
You
key
should
issue?
be, but you're just not.
And if so, what was the impact on North American archaeology? Despite the
I wasn't doing the metal
did the
shit. I
intense
wasn't doing that.
criticism of pre-Clovis sites
Toad
produce
was.
a chilling effect, stifling new ideas and hobbling the search
Company that
for
hates you
early
and
sites? The scientific
cheap
atmosphere,
as fuck.
records Tom Dillahay, was clearly toxic,
Fuck
and
that
clearly
bullshit.
impeded science.
I can't get rid of
That's
the
March
jacket though. I
8th,
have this weird.
2017. Now, these days, if you
That was a
talk to
company I had my head
archaeologists
injury
about Clovis
with.
not being first anymore, they'll say, oh, we knew that
Back
all
of a
along.
truck.
We've been saying that since the 1990s. Rubbish. Rubbish. A few archaeologists have been saying it, but the majority were ganging up on them with the forces of the Clovis police. So we're told here in 2007 that Clovis was debunked by National Geographic. The Clovis people, known for their distinctive pierheads, were not the first humans to set foot in the Americas after all. That's 2007.
What?
2012, once again, Clovis is debunked. The Clovis theory is put to rest at Paisley Caves. And then Wikipedia, admitting now recently, by the way, I regard Wikipedia as a profound source of disinformation. And I know from looking at Wikipedia entries from a subject that I know about that they're not telling the whole truth. They're presenting an agenda. And I suggest that's probably true for everything that's on Wikipedia. It's the first stop that we all go to get information, but it's not a reliable source. It's a source of disinformation.
So fast.
It's useful, but check everything they say very, very, very carefully. So Clovis, the need to debunk Clovis keeps on happening again and again. It comes back like a sort of zombie, and it has to be killed again. It just won't go away. So here's a 2022 report in the big thing, Clovis debunked. Hey, archaeologists now saying they debunked it in the 90s and in the 2000s, and now in 2022 they're still needing to say it's been debunked. This is an ongoing debate, and we have not got rid of that
What is
zombie
bunk?
yet. There are
Do you
still
want to be
people
bunked?
clinging to the Clovis first idea.
What does bunk
But here's
mean?
Al Goodyear. Al Goodyear has excavated a site called Topper, which puts man in North America 50,000 years ago. He was subjected to the same kind of attacks that Jacques Cinq Mars was subjected to. There I am talking with Al Goodyear, and he took me to the site, and he explained that initially they went there to investigate what they thought was entirely a Clovis site. But then they did something
Destroys
that other
Wikipedia, yeah,
archaeologists have never
really.
done, because archaeologists were told there's no point in looking deeper than Clovis. You know, with these
True.
layers in the soil, the younger
He's
material
right,
is
though.
at the top and the older material is at the bottom. They said there's no point in looking deeper because we know that Clovis was first. But Al Goodyear dissented, and he dug deeper. And digging deeper below the Clovis layer, he found compelling evidence that humans had been present more than 50,000 years ago. It's now beginning to be reluctantly accepted by the archaeological community, but Al went through decades of hate and unpleasantness because he stood out from the crowd. The Cerruti Mastodon site is another extraordinary site. My God, I mean, those Clovis police are saying humans were only in America for 13,000 years ago. Here's a site that shows humans were in America 130,000 years ago. 10 times as long. This is the work of paleontologist Tom Demaray and a number of his colleagues at the San Diego Natural History Museum. And they found a mastodon, the remains of a mastodon, which had clearly been butchered and the marrow extracted by human beings. Exactly what kind of human beings they were 130,000 years ago, we can't say for sure. Because 130,000 years ago, there were Neanderthals. There were Denisovans. There were also anatomically modern humans. But the handiwork of humans is clearly evident in this site. And Tom Demery took me backstage in the San Diego Natural History Museum, and he showed me that evidence, and it's utterly compelling. But of course, he was immediately attacked. They don't call them the Clovis police anymore, but there was just a general attack on what was regarded as the fantastical notion that human beings could have been in the Americas 130,000 years ago. And Tom Demeray and his team have replied to that attack very thoroughly, refuting it. But the friends of the dead hand of archaeology in the media keep on reporting that it's been debunked. It has not been debunked. Any attempt to debunk it has in fact been debunked by Tom Demeray and his colleagues. Here's Paulette Steeves. She's a Native American archaeologist, and she is very unhappy with the way that American archaeology is evolving. And she talks about how ignorance is produced through neglect, secrecy, suppression, destruction of documents, unquestioned tradition, and socio-political selectivity. Educational materials were framed in such a way to support colonization of the mind, teaching people to think in ways acceptable to the nation state and not to question so-called scientific authorities. So look, this is why my kids made for me a t-shirt with the words, I'm not wearing it today, but stuff just keeps on getting older. Because you know, if you have
the button to explode, yeah, I know, man. I'm trying to, dude.
To deal with
the rocket,
searching for a lost civilization becomes much more complex and much more difficult. But if you have a very long time frame to deal with, there's much more material to investigate.
We're at 4 big room tragedies so far.
By humans for 130,000 years, which is more than twice as long as Europe.
What's the over-under going to be?
Our understanding of prehistory must change. We have a vast resource-rich
That'd be fun.
mass.
That would be a fun poll to make. I might make that poll and put it up. Can the streamer make a poll? I don't know.
But if this were so, why have archaeologists thus far failed to recognize these developments and advances? Well, here's a bit of the open letter that the Society for American Archaeology published and sent to Netflix, complaining about my Ancient Apocalypse series, saying really vile things about it, and demanding that Netflix reclassify it as science fiction, because it doesn't represent the orthodox archaeological point of view. And I'll just read their justification. After more than a century of professional archaeological investigations, we find no archaeological evidence to support the existence of an advanced global Ice Age civilization of the kind Hancock suggests. Archaeologists have investigated hundreds of Ice Age sites and published the results in rigorously reviewed journals. The assertion that Ancient Apocalypse is a factual docuseries or documentary rather than entertainment with ideological goals is preposterous. If there were any credible evidence for a global Ice Age civilization of the kind Hancock suggests, archaeologists would investigate it and report their findings with rigor according to the scientific methods, practices, and theories of our discipline. If the evidence warranted scientific peer review, we would acquire funding to test it, publish our results, and promote it in our own outreach materials. Contrary to Hancock's claims, archaeology does not willfully ignore credible evidence, nor does it seek to suppress it in a conspiratorial fashion. I actually don't think that any conspiracy is going on here.
Man.
I think people get locked into a particular mindset. Their careers depend on it. The approval of their colleagues depend on it. The funding for their research depends on it. They get invested in that mindset, and they find it very difficult to see outside it. Part of the problem is that very ancient structures, thousands of years older than archaeologists suppose, may be hiding in plain view, surrounded by other younger structures. And the best example of that really is the is the Great Sphinx of Giza, and these two temples in front of it. This temple is a New Kingdom temple, much later even than the accepted date of the Sphinx, which is about 4,500 years ago. But the Sphinx and these two temples are deeply anomalous, and the erosion patterns in the trench around the Sphinx, and which were originally on the body of the Sphinx before it was restored, speak
I hate this
eloquently
game.
of what is
Like,
called
come on,
precipitation-induced weathering. And this was first
Like,
noticed
what?
by the late, great John
Guys.
Anthony West, a dear friend of mine, who passed away in 2018. And John West brought Professor Robert Schoch, a geologist in Boston University, to the site. And Schoch said, it's obvious. This site has been subjected to at least 1,000 years of heavy rainfall. When did that happen? Well, it happened between roughly 12,800 and 11,600 years ago. That's the last time that there were rains capable of causing this level of erosion in the Egyptian desert. See those deep vertical fissures running down there? That's the rainwater pouring off the side of the escarpment and selectively hollowing out the weaker areas of rock. For most of the 20th century, it was the consensus of archaeologists that megalithic architecture was beyond the capacities of hunter-gatherers and required the presence of long-term settled agricultural communities to evolve. And it seemed to reinforce this view that no megalithic architecture had been found anywhere in the world that was more than 6,000 years old. In fact, that was one of the main arguments that the archaeological police used to try to dismiss John West and Robert Schoch. They said, show us another culture that's 12,000 years old anywhere in the world, and we might listen to you. But we know that there is no culture capable of creating anything like the Sphinx until 4,500 years ago. Therefore, of course, the Sphinx is 4,500 years ago. But, of course, that changed completely with Göbekli Tepe, which is a deliberately buried site, deliberately buried 11,600 years ago, a very, very ancient site. Sorry, it began 11,600 years ago. It was deliberately buried about 1,000 years later, and thus sealed, and thus an intact archaeological scene. And the evidence from Göbekli Tepe is that this site is 11,600 years old. It dates to the end of a period called the Younger Dryas.
That was close. That was really close.
And my goodness, if you're capable of creating these 20-ton megalithic pillars and this huge site, then you're certainly capable of creating the Great Sphinx. So the notion that the Sphinx is somehow
I don't know.
out of
No one
context
knows.
has to completely change now that we have Göbekli Tepe.
Nobody
I'm here with
knows.
the late Professor Klaus Schmidt, who, unlike most archaeologists, did not sort of make the sign of the cross and run away as soon as I appeared on the site, but actually gave me 3 days of his time and talked me through the site in great depth. Tragically, he passed away in 2014, and he's been succeeded by a very closed-minded group of archaeologists. What he's telling me, why he's pointing at the ground, is that there's hundreds of pillars as yet unexcavated, still deeply buried under the ground, huge enclosures under the ground that they haven't excavated yet. The story of Göbekli Tepe is just beginning. And neighboring Karahan Tepe, back in 2014, when Santha and I first went there, all you could see at Karahan Tepe was a few interesting-looking bits of stone sticking out of the ground. But now Karahan Tepe has been excavated. And this is how it looks today. An extraordinary megalithic site of the same age as Göbekli Tepe, around about 11,000, 11,600 years ago. Here we have pillars carved directly out of the bedrock, and then one freestanding pillar included there, and then this curious face sticking out of the wall, which I must say gave me the chills the first time I saw it. I don't know what it's about. It's got a sort of snake-like feeling with a human head on the end of a snake's body. So there is reason to conclude that the Sphinx does not stand alone, that there are now recognized archaeological sites which involved huge amounts of workmanship that are as old as the Sphinx. And I wonder if some other sites have been misinterpreted, if sites are multi-layered, that many different cultures have been involved in them, and archaeology is perhaps making the mistake of just dating them to the most recent culture that was present. This is Baalbek in the Lebanon, and undoubtedly a Roman temple here. Temple of Jupiter that I'm sitting in, and behind it the Temple of Bacchus, dedicated to wine. Those Romans knew how to have fun. A Roman site for sure, but what about this bizarre enclosure wall that surrounds it, which is totally separate from the Temple of Jupiter? What's this about? This is called the Trilithon. Each of these 3 blocks weighs 900 tons. 900 tons. And it's extraordinary the way they're built into a wall and raised 30 feet above the ground like this. A wall, the provenance for which has not been established by archaeology. Just another look, and I'm in the picture for scale at the Trilithon. So nearby is the quarry. And the quarry contains a number of very large blocks that were never transported from the quarry site. Now, the one I'm standing on weighs 1,000 tons, 100 tons more than the ones in that wall. And that one over there, on the other side of the road, unfortunately used now as a rubbish tip, weighs 1,200 tons. And the one here that I'm standing on here, which is only recently excavated, turns out to weigh 1,400 tons. Why only recently excavated? Because the whole site was covered in sedimentation. What archaeologists
I would say off stream, yes.
Still amuses me.
Off stream, but on stream.
They found they could
Even not off stream. I mean, if you share, because what I'm doing, what I've accepted is I'm entertaining.
So they just left them in the quarry.
I am entertainment. What I'm doing
that's a
is
very
entertainment.
Un-Roman thing to do.
That is
The Romans were very
really
practical
the
people.
extent.
Okay, let's say they
Yeah,
could
you
move
like
1,000
you're
tons, but having
inspiring
gone
and
to
you're
all the
learning and you're
work
making
of
memories and
creating
friendship
huge
and all that
megaliths like
stuff.
this,
But
they
really,
wouldn't have wasted them.
the
They'd have
purpose is
sliced them up like
entertainment.
loaves of bread and used the already
And I
shaped
mean,
blocks in other constructions. The fact that they didn't do
You know,
that,
people
that
can
these
make
are still
money
there,
off of
suggests to me
it.
the whole site was covered during Roman times, and it's only in more recent times that it's been excavated and revealed.
So I mean, to play
then let's go
offline
to
and then to
Saxe-Barman,
not post
in
your
the Sacred
times
Valley,
even or
near the
videos,
town of
even if you
Cusco,
don't stream, but post your
Peru.
videos, it's still huge,
High
right?
Andes. Incredible
Like, it's massive.
megaliths there, which archaeology
You're helping others, right?
gives entirely
You're
to the
entertaining.
Incas, even though the Incas themselves
But I
recognized
mean-
and honored the work of predecessors. It gives archaeology.
That's
gives
what I
its
had to
work
learn. It's
entirely
like,
to the Incas.
I don't think
mean,
I'm
that's
happiest as an
me,
entertainer.
For scale,
I don't think I
standing
can be a
beside that
full-time
block. And
entertainer.
look
I
at
don't think
weird
that's my purpose
sort
in
of holes
life
the
to
floor. The way the
entertain.
blocks are almost fitted, melted together.
I think I
in a
may
very
have
strange
a
manner.
skill and ability
It's
to
very
potentially
different
be
from what is
interesting
definitely Inca
and
architecture.
make what I
I'll
think
just show a few more
important
shots. These
for
sort of
others.
scallops in the side
by
of the block,
teaching
these holes. It almost looks
through
like the stone
passion.
was soft and that people were pressing something into it.
But I
It
mean,
raises the question: was there a way of
my
manipulating
purpose
and
is to
even
be an
melting
entertainer.
stone, putting it in place?
and I think that's why. I mean, I love streaming. I'm having a lot
work
of
is
success
very
recently
fine.
streaming, just even
I
with
mean,
friendships, bro.
you
Like
can't
you're,
get
you guys are my
a razor
friends.
blade
really.
between the joints in the blocks.
And-
It's just incredibly fine megalithic
But I mean,
work.
it's not like I'm like fucking
and I was
simply
privileged to
like
spend.
100,000.
I've had several
not that
visits to the Andes with
I'm
Jesus
saying I'm not
Camara,
happy now
who himself
with
is a descendant
hanging out with you and
of the
talking with you,
Incas,
but
and who is a local
it's almost
researcher
like there's
following
this
in the
block because
footsteps
I'm
of
not.
his
It's not my
father,
life purpose.
who
You know
also
what I
was
mean?
intensely interested in the megaliths. And he and his father are
It's
both
like,
confident, absolutely
I'm
confident.
not the Freddie
that,
next
the
Freddie
Incas
Mercury because
simply
that's
were
not my.
latecomers, and that they
not my life
rebuilt, they
purpose.
built on top of, they modified, they honored by overbuilding the much older structures.
And
that
maybe
are
that's why
the
people aren't,
megalithic
like-
structures. And
Because
here
I
we
mean,
are at
a lot
Pisac,
more
and
than
Jesus
300
is
people
showing
have
me
come by my
different
channel in the
aspects of
last
site and at
several years,
Sacsayhuaman,
right?
and
And I have the
explaining his
300
view
something
that
followers,
actually
which I love.
there's
I
evidence
appreciate
for
every
three
single one.
cultures there,
But I
the
mean,
Incas being the last, and that there
well,
were
I would
two
say the
earlier
majority of people
cultures,
don't follow me.
and he believes that the
Which I
megalithic
mean is
work is
to be
entirely the work of
expected, but
these
the question
earlier
is like,
cultures
why?
and has been wrongly
Compared to
handed to
someone
his
else?
ancestors, the Incas.
It's like, yeah, I don't have that
and
much. I
weirdly,
don't provide that much content, maybe
there
because I haven't
near
spent so much
Cusco,
time.
We have this curious
'Cause it's not my
stonework, and
life
we also
purpose
have
and
it
my
at
passion.
Alacahoyuk in Turkey. Exactly the same kind of thing.
Fucking
Is this a
playing this game and
coincidence,
getting
or
these
is there
times
something
is.
going on behind the scenes of history that we've not been
That's
fully
which
informed
is what
about
I'm
yet? And oddly, these patterns, these T-shaped pillars that we see at Göbekli Tepe, are repeated
But I need to
at
have
the
it
temple
be a
of
hobby.
Edfu
That's
in
what I'm
Upper
saying.
Egypt,
That's what I'm getting at.
and also in Peru.
I need it to be a hobby.
Let's go to Tiwanaku, even higher in the
Or
Andes. We're now
I
14,000
become the next
feet
Indiana
above
Jones
sea
and
level.
create my own
And
type
this
of research.
300-ton block, God knows how anybody got it up there at 14,000 feet above sea. I can even breathe at 14,000 feet above sea level. It takes me days to get acclimatized. This massive megalithic site in Tiwanaku. And some curiosities. There's these H-shaped blocks. We recognize them as a H because H is a letter in our alphabet. That's of course not what they meant to the ancients, but it's the shape I want to draw attention to, because that same shape appears at Göbekli Tepe. It appears on the belts of some of the figures. Now, I'm not saying that people from Göbekli Tepe brought that idea to the Americas. I suspect it more likely the other way around, actually. But what I'm saying is that there appears to be an iconographic connection between the two sites, which is not explained by current theories of archaeology. Tiwanaku is a very controversial site, and archaeologists would like it not to be much more than 2,000 years old. But there's curious astronomical alignments at Tiwanaku, which make it clear that the site was aligned to the summer solstice in 10,500 BC, 12,500 years ago. And this is because the rising point of the sun on the solstice changes as a result of shifts in the obliquity of the Earth's axis over a 41,000-year cycle. Tiwanaku makes much more sense as 12,500 years old from an astronomical point of view than it does as 2,000 years old. Some other figures here. The ones on the right, starting here, are all from Tiwanaku. But over here we have the god Osiris from Egypt, a bearded figure, remembered by the ancient Egyptians as a bringer of the gifts of civilization, not only in Egypt, but in many other lands as well. And down here we have the earliest surviving representation of the feathered serpent, Quetzalcoatl, in Mexico, from the Olmec culture. And again, Quetzalcoatl is remembered in traditions from Central America as a bringer of civilization and as a teacher of civilization. So let's move over now to Tiwanaku. There's this pillar in the so-called semi-subterranean chamber, and on the front of the pillar is this face, which is the face of a deity venerated in the Andes for millennia. And the name of that deity is Viracocha. Notice the heavy beard on the figure here and here. There's a
I'm gonna go for a drive for this afternoon and enjoy the sun. You're gonna crash? Nice, dude.
A curious animal.
Peace, bro. Yo, thanks for being here, man.
We've highlighted it here.
I was about to say I might go for a drive this afternoon in about half an hour, maybe.
Like is an extinct
Just go outside, enjoy the sun, and then maybe play tonight. Enjoy the sun, yeah, thanks,
bro. It looks a lot like Toxodon, which went extinct at the end of the Ice Age. What's it doing on this pillar if the site is only 2,000 years old? Then there's another problem. Okay, I suggest strongly that evidence for much earlier megalithic construction is hiding in plain view and has been misdated by archaeology. But there's a far greater problem that's posed by the huge areas of the Earth where only minimal archaeological investigations have ever been carried out. Well, the Sahara Desert, for example. Yes, there's been some archaeology in the Sahara Desert.
Thanks for being here, bro.
But not very much. I get it. It's a very expensive place to work. It's a very tough place to work. And besides, archaeology has the view that there's not much to find there. There has been some archaeology done, but very, very little. Minimal. That's 9.2 million square kilometers of the Earth's surface that hasn't yet really been studied by archaeology at all. It's around about the size of the Republic of China. It's like talking about the world and excluding China completely from the story. We can't say we've got the past completely nailed down when we haven't thoroughly investigated the Sahara Desert, because the Sahara Desert was green during the Ice Age. It wasn't how it looks today. It was a fertile area for many periods during the Ice Age. And oddly enough, there are ancient maps copied from even older source maps which show river channels in the Sahara and lakes. And weirdly, recent surveys have demonstrated that there was a river channel exactly where indicated on that mysterious ancient map. Here's Antarctica as it looks today. Well, this map was drawn in 1813. It's the Pinkerton World Map, and it's based on the latest science available in 1813. It's a really good map where it comes to South America and South Africa and Australia. But as you will observe, something's missing from the picture. Antarctica isn't there. Why isn't Antarctica there? Because it's an honest map. They hadn't discovered it in 1813. They didn't discover it until 1820. So it's very odd, in my view, that Antarctica appears on much older source maps, which themselves are based on even older source maps. It's interesting, this little legend down here, I've had it translated. Behold clearly to you, O reader, Orontius Phineus Delphinates offers with elegant appearance a geography not so far seen and accurately engraved, which in fact preserves the shape and form of the human heart. And take care that it should be at heart for you. And also presents to your eye provinces, islands, seas, rivers, mountains, not so far seen nor known to some of the great map papers of antiquity, Ptolemy, Eudoxius, Aristophanes, Macrobius. And we're told that these areas lay in darkness until this map was drawn. I suggest they lay in darkness because they were on the much older source maps that Orontius Phineus and other map makers drew upon, source maps that came out into public circulation from about the 1400s, 1300s onwards, probably taken from Constantinople. And then what about the area of the world that was covered by rising sea levels at the end of the Ice Age? This is another area where very little archaeology has been done. We are talking about 27 million square kilometers. That's roughly equivalent in size to China, the US, and Europe, all added together, that were above water during the Ice Age and that were submerged at the end of the Ice Age. Again, I'll come to those ancient maps. On the left, we have Southeast Asia in 1507, and as it looks today. And on the right, we have an inundation map showing Southeast Asia and Australia as they looked 21,300 years ago when sea level was 400 feet lower than they are today. As you can see, what today is an archipelago of islands and the Malaysian peninsula was a huge subcontinent-sized landmass. New Guinea was joined to Australia at that time. And it's interesting that this other mysterious map, again drawn from older source maps, seems to depict the Sunda Shelf as it looked during the last Ice Age. So this map is showing present land masses and the sunken land masses that were submerged at the end of the Ice Age. The Sunda Shelf is particularly interesting. We now know that it was highly fertile, highly attractive land during the Ice Age. So you didn't really want to spend a lot of time in the far northern hemisphere during the Ice Age. You wanted to get down near the equator. That was the best, warmest land on Earth. And this would have been a fantastic place for people to settle and for civilizations to evolve. And that's why I'm so interested, and we depicted it in Ancient Apocalypse, this work by geologist Danny Hillman Natwajaja at Gunung Padang on the island of Java. And I'm suggesting, and Danny believes, that this site is originated more than 20,000 years ago. It may have been added to by later cultures. It's still venerated today, but it's a very, very old site in his view. It was one of those high areas that was above water, that remained above water even after sea level rose at the end of the Ice Age. It's on the island of Java, but that island of Java was connected to Sumatra and Borneo and the Malaysian peninsula when the Sunda Shelf was above water. So, Sahara Desert, 9 million square kilometers, 27 million square kilometers submerged at the end of the Ice Age, the best real estate on Earth. Is marine archaeology being done? Yes, it is. Marine archaeology is being done. It does exist. It's very expensive, and not a lot of it is done. But when I saw this headline, I thought, I've got somebody on my side. Archaeologist explains why we need to look underwater to understand the past. But then the explanation is so disappointing, because what he's looking for is shipwrecks from the 16 and 1700s. And that's primarily what all marine archaeology is about. It's changing now. It's changing slowly. We know about Doggerland as a result, and archaeologists are beginning to look at it. But my point is that the vast area that was submerged during the end of the Ice Age has never been studied by archaeology at all. And they're not in a position to say that they know that there's no possibility of a lost civilization during the Ice Age, while they haven't investigated those 27 million square kilometers that are now underwater, when they haven't investigated the Sahara Desert. Well, Santa and I decided to do some investigation of our own underwater. And actually, we spent the best part of 10 years scuba diving all over the world, following up tales and traditions from local divers and fishermen, looking for structures underwater. And here at Ponape, the well-known site of Nan Madol, we followed up the advice of local divers, and we went underwater. And we find that the site doesn't just stop there. It continues underwater, and at first it continues with the same kind of construction that you see above water. But as you go deeper, as you get down to about 27 meters underwater, you start seeing structures that are completely different, these huge pillars underwater. And a fallen pillar here, which is very interesting because it so closely resembles the pillars of Tinian in nearby area of the Pacific. Micronesia, and this is Tinian, and I'm suggesting again that that pillar underwater suggests to us that Tinian megalith may be much older than we're told. That's my fins disappearing through a tunnel underwater in Japan. Santa and I did more than 200 dives around this site. It's called Yonaguni. And I'm going to show you why I believe archaeologists are wrong. Archaeologists who've never dived there, who wouldn't even contemplate diving there.
Come on, man.
Diving at Yonaguni is really dangerous. There's a massive current there. You get swept away. If you try and stop and examine the structure, you end up fighting the sea. And believe me, you don't want to fight the sea. When the sea sends a current your way, the best thing you can do is just go with it, adrift, and that's great fun. But you try to hang on to a structure, and the sea's going to beat you up badly. Well, that's the edges of that tunnel. And as you can see, it's a megalithic tunnel with one block piled on top of the other. And then at the end of the tunnel, we see this. 2 blocks positioned side by side. And that's me just diving down beside those blocks to show their nature and their scale. They're enormous. And archaeologists say, oh, no problem. They must have fallen from some cliff overhead. The only problem is there is no cliff overhead, and never has been. So those 2 blocks, this is them in context. There they are. That tunnel that I went through is down here. There's the 2 blocks, and then there's this massive, completely natural stone outcropping. I'm not disputing that it's natural, but as we continue to explore that outcropping, what do we find? We find a flat terrace, and we find steps on the terrace. And in my mind, this speaks strongly of human workmanship. Japan is a megalithic culture. Many of the megaliths in Japan have never really been properly studied. This one is called Masado no Iwafuna, the upside-down boat stone in the Asuka area of Japan. It's interesting that if you go around to the other side of that huge megalith, you'll see how it was created. They cut out these grooves in it, creating these outcroppings, which if they'd finished the work would have been smoothed off and left to look like the rest of the structure. Oddly enough, exactly the same stone cutting technique is found underwater at Yonaguni, and since it's nearly 30 meters underwater, it's been underwater for more than 12,000 years. Above water in Japan, you do have megalithic stone circles. The one at the top left is from Hokkaido. Aomori on the right, very small river stones used to create a circle. And then Shikoku down at the bottom left. Well, we heard of a site in the Kerama Islands, in the southern part of Japan, where there was a stone circle underwater. Well, we couldn't resist that. So we went diving there. And lo and behold, what did we find? A massive stone circle. and indeed circles made of small river stones as well, but 30 meters underwater, 12,000 years old plus. What is going on here? Well, that's me with a video camera up there and a diver down there beside the central upright for scale. These megaliths, like the pillars at Karat and Tepe, are carved out of bedrock. They're carved out of bedrock. And it's really difficult for me to see how nature could have done this. I mean, there I am on top of the central upright. Look at the way the outer curve of the central upright matches the inner curve of one of the outer uprights. Here we are now in Taiwan. From that island of Yonaguni, Taiwan is actually visible on a clear day. Here we're underwater with local diver Steve Shea at Taiwan, and he's showing us a wall he discovered underwater, about 20 meters underwater. And that wall has battlements, and it has a kind of plaza in front of it. And unless there's any doubt that it's man-made, let's get up close and look at it. It's made of individual blocks of stone. This doesn't happen naturally. This is a man-made structure underwater, which archaeology has paid absolutely zero attention to. And then what about India? Diving in Indian waters is often quite murky. There's a lot of sediment in the water, makes it very difficult to see. But here's South India as it looked during the Ice Age, when sea level was much lower. Sri Lanka was joined to South India. And I'm interested in two sites in particular in South India, Pumpahar and Mahabalipuram. Pumpahar we heard about from the National Oceanographic Institute of India. We're based in Goa. And they kindly actually took us diving at Pumpahar and showed us what they are confident is a man-made structure. They describe it as a U-shaped structure at 29 meters underwater. And I apologize for the visibility, but that's what you dive in there. Fishermen get their nets caught on it, causes trouble to fishermen all the time. In fact, they would like it removed. And there are individual blocks surrounding it. Further north at Mahabalipuram, was Santha and I who investigated this area first. Santha speaks the Tamil language as her first language. And so we were able to communicate easily and fluently with local fishermen. And we asked them at Mahabalipuram, is there anything underwater that you guys know about? And they said, yeah, there's a whole city out there. And we're really annoyed about it because we keep catching our nets on it and we have to send down divers, and not scuba divers, free divers, and sometimes they get killed. And we've asked the government to do something about it, but they don't believe us. Well, we believe them. It took about 2 years to organize the expedition, and we had to involve the Scientific Exploration Society led by John Blashford Snell in Britain. As you can see, it was a very high-tech expedition. And off we went, diving off the waters of Mahabalipuram, and immediately we saw the fishermen were right, that there are man-made structures underwater, 2 blocks side by side here, a bit of a wall sticking above the sand, a wall with a standout feature. There I'm putting my dive knife into the gap between 2 blocks. Another pair of blocks there, and a curved feature. There's so much more underwater at Mahabalipuram. Well, following that investigation, it was decided that some archaeology would be done. But to my frustration, the archaeology so far has been confined to the intertidal zone, just down to 5 meters. And they haven't been down to 27 to 30 meters where we found these structures yet. So, you know, if Santha and I, out of our own pocket, can go diving and find stuff underwater which doesn't fit the picture of history that we're given by archaeologists, what would be found if real investment were put into searching the underwater, the submerged continental shelves? I think a great deal would be found. There's another area of the world where archaeologists haven't looked enough, and that area of the world is the Amazon rainforest. It's about 7 million square kilometers in size, and there have been tragic clearances of the Amazon, as we all know.
Oh, that was so good.
Terrible mistake.
That was so fast, man.
To cut down old-growth rainforests and replace it with soybean farms to feed cattle so that we can all eat hamburgers. What a stupid decision, especially since rainforest soils are not particularly fertile, and they are fertilized by the fall of vegetation onto them. Once you remove the trees, you're in a place, that soybean farm's only going to last 10 years, then it's going to be useless. So the destruction of the Amazon is a huge mistake that human beings are making. We've still got 5.5 million square kilometers left covered by rainforest. And extraordinary evidence is beginning to come out of those 5.5 million kilometers. Not just that genetic signal that connects peoples of the Amazon to peoples of Australasia, but real archaeology. This is in one of the areas already cleared. And this is the work of Marty Parson and Sanasau Noloma and Alkeo Ramsey, who have been investigating what they describe as the Amazonian geoglyphs. And here we have a square with an embankment around it. And here we have a square with its own embankment surrounding a circle with its own embankment. It actually looks a bit like the henges that we find in England, very like Avebury Henge, as a matter of fact, in many ways. And this is where it's happening. It's in the Brazilian state of Acre, and it's the location of the principal geoglyph sites that have been discovered by 2019. There's another one. They're very geometrical, these geoglyphs. The circle enclosing a square or an oval enclosing a square are repeated again and again. And here we have these sort of curious little scallops taken out of a square and another circle. And Taquino is a massive site, 37 acres it once extended over. But its two principal squares still remain. The largest measures 210 by 210 meters. It's got two further squares internested within it. And the smaller square, which has been extensively damaged, measures 130 by 130 meters. The larger square is 40 meters wide and opens onto a causeway 1.5 kilometers long. And all this was happening in the Amazon thousands of years ago. So, keep in mind this redrawing of this site, Fazenda Colorada.
All right, 15 more minutes and then I'm probably going to go outside and enjoy the sun a bit. Take a little break and I'll probably play tonight.
And Severino Calazans are both
Probably what's
oriented to true
I need to take a
astronomical
break. Like, I'm just going crazy here.
as are the Giza pyramids. And Severino Calazans on the
Need to give my hands a
has the
break
same
too,
footprint
honestly.
as the Great Pyramid of Giza, measuring 230 meters along each side, and is equally precisely aligned to true astronomical
Exactly what
length.
I'm going to do.
Now I'm going to talk a bit about ayahuasca, which is one of the great discoveries of the peoples of the Amazon. This is Shipibo ayahuasca art. And as you can see, part of the art of ayahuasca is geometry. It's filled with geometry. Anybody who's had an experience in a deeply altered state of consciousness, whether with psilocybin, whether with LSD, whether with DMT, which is the active ingredient in ayahuasca, will almost certainly at some point or another see geometrical patterns. They're very common in the early stages of the journey. And what is depicted here is visions seen under the influence of ayahuasca. And on the right here, we have an amazing painting by the late, great Pablo Amaringo, a great visionary artist, worked with ayahuasca all his life and was gifted as an artist. And he shows us something of the enchanted realm that ayahuasca can bring us into. And it's seen as literally as a portal. Ayahuasca is seen as a portal that takes us to the other side. I want to be clear that ayahuasca is very serious business. I've had 75 or so sessions with ayahuasca. I'm not in a rush to have my next. I want to dispel the myth at the moment that any hallucinogens are addictive. They are not. There are no addictive hallucinogens. Unfortunately, medical science is beginning to catch up with the fantastic potential, therapeutic potential of these ancient medicines. But ayahuasca is very serious business. It's going to make you confront truths about yourself that you might prefer not to know. And you're going to go through a bit of a physical ordeal. You're going to vomit, you're going to have diarrhea. I mean, nobody's rushing to do that. You know, and actually just looking at the brew there just does make me feel a little bit sick. So you have to brace yourself for an ayahuasca experience. And another of Pablo's visions, we'll notice that there are creatures called therianthropes in this vision. Those are the body of an animal and the head of a human being, or it can be the other way around. It's from the Greek therion, which means wild beast, and anthropos, which means human. Again, these are very commonly reported, and I've seen them myself many times, in visions in altered states of consciousness. Entities are encountered, and often they take animal form or mixed animal and human form. And here the Tucano of the Amazon are particularly, their culture is particularly closely connected to ayahuasca. And here we see a Tucano shaman guiding his son through an ayahuasca experience, helping him navigate the infinite terrain of the other side. And in the other photographs, we see Tucano ayahuasca art, which again is reflecting the geometry seen in ayahuasca visions. I'm going to read this. This is from Gerardo Rachel Dolmatov, one of the great experts on Tucano. Although any member of the Tucano community may drink ayahuasca, the deeper mysteries of the brew are primarily the work of the shaman, whose responsibility it is to travel through the portal to the other side, whenever required to negotiate with powerful supernaturals on behalf of his community. Where matters of the greatest importance must be resolved, a group of payes will work together, consuming massive quantities of ayahuasca, until they reach a point lying in their hammocks where they feel they are ascending to the Milky Way. The ascent to the Milky Way is not easily accomplished. An apprentice will hardly ever be able to rise immediately to this sublunary region, but rather will learn to do so after many trials. At first, he will barely rise over the horizon.
Come on.
The next time, perhaps he will reach a point corresponding to the position of the sun at 9 a.m., then at 10 a.m., and so on until at last, in a single soaring flight,
10 more minutes.
He will reach the zenith.
10 minutes
so,
and
in
counting.
summary, the shaman's visionary journey through the ayahuasca portal involves a leap, or after sufficient practice, a soaring flight to the Milky Way. Not the final goal. It's a way station. Beyond the Milky Way lies the entrance to the other world. And again, I'll quote Gerardo Rachel Dolmatov. It is said that the individual dies when he drinks the potion, and that now his spirit returns to the uterine regions of the beyond, only to be reborn there and to return to his ordinary existence when the trance is over. This then is conceived as an acceleration of time, an anticipation of death and rebirth. So ayahuasca is a kind of guide to the afterlife realm. It's a kind of book of the dead, not written in text, but in direct experience. And on the lower left there, this is the entrance to the other world, as depicted in Tucano ayahuasca art. So I'll bring you back to that diagram, that site at Fazenda, Colorado, that I drew your attention to. And I can't help noticing how similar this part of it is to the entrance to the other world as depicted in Tucano art. There's much other research that supports this, that the Amazonian geoglyphs were connected to the same complex of death and afterlife beliefs that flourished in ancient Egypt and I'll come to this, and in the ancient Mississippi Valley in North America. So, top left, this is a great Western ayahuasca artist, my friend Martina Hoffman. She's depicting some of the many manifestations of Mother Ayahuasca. This is generally how we in the West experience the entity behind the ayahuasca brew, who has harnessed the ayahuasca brew to access human consciousness. In some cultures, the spirit of ayahuasca is seen as male, not as female. That's particularly so amongst a few of the Amazonian cultures, but generally the spirit is seen as female. She's a shapeshifter. She can be whatever she wants to be. I'm just struck by the similarity to this Egyptian image from the right, the goddess Isis feeding Ankh, immortal life, to the pharaoh Seti I. And let's not forget, for more than 3,000 years, the ancient Egyptians put their best minds to work on the mystery of death. And we should not dismiss their explorations into what happens after death as simple fantasies, because there's 3,000 years of work went into those explanations. Of course, scientists don't believe in any survival of death. For science, which is focused largely on weighing, measuring, and counting, we're just biological machines. We got our consciousness, it's an accidental byproduct. It's an epiphenomenon of brain activity. We needed these big brains to compete in the jungle of the universe. And as an accident, our big brains gave us consciousness. The notion, therefore, that consciousness might survive death is abhorrent to most scientists, particularly to scientists like Richard Dawkins, who somehow knows that there is no life after death. How can anybody possibly know that? It's a great mystery. None of us know what's going to happen when we die. Maybe we just will blink out and there's nothing more. Or maybe there is something more, as many ancient traditions suggest. I think we should listen to those ancient traditions. Ayahuasca means the vine of souls or the vine of the dead, and it does so for good reasons. There are many similarities in the ayahuasca journey to what we call near-death experiences in the West. A sense of encounter with those who have passed on, with deceased relatives, communicating with us. And very frequently and painfully, ayahuasca requires us to confront and question our own behavior during life. It puts us on the spot. She puts us on the spot. Look at your own life and look at it seriously. What have you done with it? And this is so similar to the ancient Egyptian view, which is expressed symbolically as the judgment of the soul. Here, in one of the tombs of the nobles on the west bank at Luxor in Upper Egypt, we see the deceased being ushered into what is called the Hall of Maat. This is the goddess Maat, and that feather that is her symbol that she wears on her headdress is the feather of truth and cosmic justice and harmony. The soul is brought into her presence and then confronts this scene, which is the weighing of the soul depicted here as the heart of the individual, weighed in the scales against the feather of Maat. You do not want your heart to be heavy with wickedness and to outweigh that feather. You want to be in balance with that feather from the ancient Egyptian point of view. Now, there are many moral aspects to the ancient Egyptian judgment scene. These guys up here are called the 42 negative assessors. And they're going to ask the soul 42 questions. And ideally, the soul should be able to answer no to every one of them. They include some of the 10 Commandments. Did you kill? Did you steal? Did you lie? Ideally, we should be able to answer no to all of them, but the ancient Egyptians knew that we are frail human beings. We will constantly make mistakes. We will constantly backslide during life. The point is, do we use this opportunity of life to make ourselves better people?
Yo, what's up, Christian? How are you, bro?
Or do we waste that opportunity of life? So there's the scales.
How are you, big Christian? How are you, man? Hope you're doing well, man.
Right is the God
I'm about to sign off in 5 minutes.
God of wisdom.
Enjoy the day.
Who's writing down
go outside, enjoy the day a bit.
Over here,
take a break from this game.
Amit, the eater of the dead, those who have lived wicked, selfish, cruel, vicious lives. Their journey will not continue. They will face annihilation in the Hall of Maat. And sitting at the head of the hall is the god Osiris. I love this image that Santa photographed in the tombs of the nobles. The objective of the whole journey is that at the end of it, you should be able to look your own soul in the face and say, yes, I made mistakes. Yes, I committed errors. But I tried to put them right. And by and large, I did good. And there's another more fundamental question than any of the moral questions. And that question, it seems to me, is, did you get it? Did you get what we gave you the gift of life for, what the universe gave you the gift of life for? It's a precious opportunity to be born in a human body, to have the potential to explore consciousness in the way that we do. Did you get it? That you were given a privilege to be here? Or did you waste your time on frivolous pursuits and on production and consumption and on your ego and on accumulating material possessions? The ancient Egyptian pyramid texts are the oldest recension of what we know of as the Book of the Dead. These are carved on the walls of the 5th dynasty pyramid of Unas. That is the name of Unas there. That's his cartouche. And over there, this circle surrounding a star depicts the Duat. That was the name for the ancient Egyptian afterlife realm, through which our soul would journey after death and be tested on the life that we've lived. And these are other recensions of the same ideas, the ancient Egyptian coffin texts, the Book of the Dead, the book of what is in the Duat. They seek to prepare us for our journey through the afterlife. I love this double exposure that Santha took. In the foreground
wow, insane, man.
Is the Pyramid of Unas with the pyramid text, and then on the second exposure behind, we have the.
Do you have a link for that? Do you have?
And I would suggest
that's
that
a
what
great
the
price.
pyramid texts and the books of the dead achieve in hieroglyphs and imagery, the pyramids of Giza and Acropolis manifest in 3 dimensions. The Giza pyramids are not inscribed. So scholars agree that Osiris was identified by the ancient Egyptians with the constellation of Orion. The ancient Egyptians called that constellation Sahu. And he
wow,
was
insane,
viewed as
dude.
the figure of Osiris in the night sky, ruling over
nice of
the
you. Thanks,
afterlife
man.
kingdom of the Duat. And the
I'll
Duat
take a look
itself
and I'll think
was
about it.
not
I'll think about
underground.
it. Thanks,
It was
man.
envisaged as being
Appreciate that very
located in
much.
the sky between the constellations of Leo and
That
Orion.
would be fun. Would be a
the
ton of
great
fun.
heavenly river of the Milky Way, the winding waterway, as its central feature. As you can see, the constellation of Orion stands beside the Milky Way. I want to pay tribute to the work of my great friend, Robert Bauval, the originator
Thanks, man.
of
That's
the
nice of you.
Orion
It's considerate
correlation
of you.
theory, which of course archaeology has completely rejected, largely because archaeologists just don't understand astronomy and don't want to. This is not the sky above Egypt in 4,500 years ago. That's the other problem. Because the skies constantly change because of a wobble on the Earth's axis called precession. The Earth is our viewing platform from which we observe the stars, so naturally the wobble changes our perspective on the stars. This is the sky of roughly between 12,800 and 11,600 years ago. And as the constellation
Have you
of
purchased
Orion
your flight for that
crosses
yet?
the meridian, we see that it's in the same pattern as the 3 great pyramids on the ground, and there, rising due east in that period, is the constellation of Leo.
Oh wow,
gazed
insane!
at
Can you send
directly
me?
by the Great Sphinx, the Leonine Great Sphinx. So
Can
in
you
the
send me
ancient
some
Egyptian
info on
view,
it, if that's okay?
how does the soul of the earthly deceased ascend to the Duat?
April 1st.
Well, it does so through a leap or a flight, just as the Tucano described. There are narrow shafts cut through the walls of the Great Pyramid.
Better
2
not
of
be
them
an
in the
elaborate
King's
April
Chamber, the
Fool's
so-called
joke.
King's Chamber, and 2 of them in the Queen's Chamber. The Queen's Chamber shafts actually don't exit on the outside of the pyramid. The King's Chamber shafts do. And one of those shafts from the King's Chamber points directly at the
So
lowest
you
of the 3
can't,
stars
of course you can't.
of Orion's belt. And here's the
of course you
mystery,
can't.
because although the layout on the ground depicts
course
the
you
skies 12,000 years ago or so, this connection to the stars is indeed from the era of 4,500 years ago. I am not seeking to divorce the ancient Egyptians from the construction of the Great Pyramids. I think they were intimately involved. I think they were completing a much older project. I see platforms on the ground there going back 12,000 years, and the work completed by the ancient Egyptians, who tell us how the knowledge was passed down to them from what they call Zep-Tepi, the first time. So there's this leap to the
Congratulations,
heavens
man.
that involves the journey through the Duat in ancient Egypt. I'll just quote a few passages from a book that Santha and I published in 1998, Heaven's Mirror,
Do you have any
concerning
proof?
Mexico.
Do you have any proof? Can you prove
Excuse me
anything?
for reading, but my memory
you're
these
saying?
days is not
Can you
quite what it was
prove?
40 years ago. Very much like the ancient Egyptians,
Oh my
the peoples
God.
of ancient Central America located their netherworld in a region of the sky through which ran the Milky
Thank
Way.
you.
For the Maya, the Milky Way was a particularly important feature of the heavens. They conceived of it as the road that led to their netherworld, Xibalba, which in common with other Central American peoples and with the ancient Egyptians and with the Tucano, they located in the sky. So here we have a study of Tatlan's major temple, and studied by Fernandez Cormac et al., man city of Utatlan, Guatemala, designed according to the celestial scheme reflected by the shape of the constellation of Orion.
Jesus, I'm gonna.
He's able to
fucking
prove
blow
that
my
all
brains
of Utatlan's major temples were oriented to the helical setting points of the stars in Orion, and he argued that the Milky Way,
not gonna do that.
alongside which Orion stands, was thought of as a celestial path connecting the firmament's navel with the center of the underworld. So close to the ancient Egyptian idea. I'm not saying the ancient Egyptians brought it to Central America or the other way around. I'm just observing the connection, the similarity in this complex set of religious beliefs Orion was extensively involved in Mayan rebirth beliefs, which described the constellation and specifically its 3 belt stars as the turtle of rebirth. In Egypt, as amongst the Maya, the stellar context involves Orion and the Milky Way.
One more
Egypt,
run and then I'm going to
as in
sign off.
Mexico,
Go outside,
the
enjoy
journey
the
through
day. It's nice and
netherworld
sunny.
must be undertaken by the deceased. In Egypt, as in Mexico, religious teachings
Then I'll
assert
probably
that
play
life
tonight,
is our
probably.
opportunity to prepare for this journey. An opportunity that should, under no circumstances, be missed.
Have to go now. Cool, man. No worries, man.
Let's go to North America now.
Thanks for stopping by.
This
Thanks
is
for being here.
the tragedy
Thanks for the message.
of the North American pyramids, often referred to as mounds. The tragedy. There was once more than 1 million of them. Only 100,000 are left now. And most of those 100,000 have been subjected to horrific destruction.
Yo, what's up,
I'm
Star
looking at
Stash? On
Mound
Zoom?
A
Cool,
from
man.
Mound B here. And as you can see, Mound A
That's cool, bro.
has been largely destroyed. A little bit of it is left.
I'm going to sign off, though. Thanks for being here, Stash.
Well, here's a notice board
Again, coming back.
at Moundville in Alabama, and I'm going to show you what the text of that notice board
It's the last
says,
one,
because this is
probably.
official archaeology that's saying this.
What? Why?
And I have no problem with what official archaeology is saying here. Because what they're
fuck,
saying
man?
is, at Moundville, an excellent example of a
Alright, one
powerful
more.
religious image was the
One
hand and eye
more,
motif.
one more.
Moundville's rattlesnake disc,
That's cool on
featured
Zoom.
on
That's
that
cool,
notice
bro.
board, offers us the best known version, although numerous variations occur, etc., etc. Stories passed down among various tribes tell of the dead entering the afterlife through an opening marked by a great warrior's hand in the sky. One account describes that hand as the constellation we know as Orion, with Orion's belt as its wrist, its fingers pointing downwards. A faint cluster of stars in the center of the
Please.
palm
Please. Like, what?
is a
I hate
portal
this
to the
game.
path of souls or the
I really
path to
do.
the land of the dead. Researchers speculate that the hand and eye represent this constellation.
I hate this game, bros.
Pick up a few more comments that we found on the official notice boards at Moundville, again highlighting Orion. As a group, the knotted serpents and the hand and eye are believed to be a representation of the night sky. The serpents are the ropes that join the earth and sky. In the palm of the hand is a portal or doorway through which the spirits of the dead can ascend the path of souls, or Milky Way, in their extended journey to the realm of the dead.
What?
Path of souls,
So dumb.
again mentioned there. The gateway or
Dude, I was
portal
going in
between
on
the
so
celestial
dumb.
realms and the earth disk was symbolized and artistically rendered as an open hand with an eye in its palm. We know the hand as part of the constellation of Orion. Once the portal was crossed, the souls of the dead began their journey by walking along a road or ribbon of light, the Milky Way. Essentially the same spiritual idea that's expressed in ancient Egypt and in South America. And this is how it works. The Orion's belt was the wrist, and other stars of Orion were involved in the fingers and the thumb. This is, and it's an example of the hand and eye motif, and the Orion nebula is represented by the eye in the palm of the hand, and was conceived of as a portal through which the soul must leap on its afterlife journey. Now, Professor George Langford is an internationally recognized authority on Native American folklore, anthropology, religious studies, and ethnohistory. And he notes that the portal in the hand must be entered by a leap at the optimum time. Again, we're looking at a system of religious ideas that seems to have been shared all around the world concerning the afterlife destiny of the soul. And I'm not suggesting that Egypt influenced Mexico or influenced North America. I'm suggesting the possibility of a remote common source from which these ideas descended and were disseminated all around the world. So we have another leap up to a portal in the sky in the constellation of Orion. And there's the ancient Egyptian hieroglyph